Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 188. That's PEP or Planet Extra podcast. It's an offshoot of Planet America on ABC Australia, which you can see on Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV and 8 p.m. on Fridays on ABC News, or anytime you like on iView or Facebook at ABC Planet America, or on YouTube on the ABC News In-Depth channel. On PEP, we cover all the stuff that's too nerdy for TV. If you're listening to us, you can also find PEP on YouTube and Facebook, where you'll find timestamps and show notes in the blurb. And if you leave a comment under those videos, we're likely to see it. You can also tweet us at PEPCHASDRDAVE. That's at PepChazDrDave. If you want to chat to some fellow peppers, you can join our Discord server. It's on the screen right now or in the blurb of the podcast. But if you want to contact me or Lockie the Lackey privately, why not email us? The address is producer@pepthepodcast.com. That address again is producer@pepthepodcast.com. And if you want to buy merch, that address is pepchazdaveshop.com. Perfect for Christmas. But for now, I have two giants of the pep world. Well, one physical giant, one kind of the opposite. Neither of whom ever raises the stakes on Inconsequential Views. It's writer Richard Cooke and TV producer and Planet America breakout star Melina Wicks. Hello, folks.
Hello.
Chaz.
And we're also joined by Richie's energy polarizer again. Just show that off there, Rich, for people who are watching. Wonderful. We'll be selling them one of these days real soon. We are the only people left in the ABC that are not currently on the junket to America. So I'm surprised. The place is so empty, I'm surprised it's not echoing. We're going to enjoy ourselves here. We're going to sort of have a risky business style election special where we're just dancing around with our pants off in our underwear in our parents' house, sliding around. It's probably a reference that's so old that no one's going to get it, and it's just going to sound really kind of pervy, but that's all right. Well, for your information at home, this is Friday afternoon, 8th of November, 7 o'clock at night. So now you'll know how fast Lockie can edit after we finish this. Folks, let's start off. Richie, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for fallen soldier Dr. Dave.
Oh, yes.
At the final hurdle, arguably, well, certainly the election episode of PEP itself, he has gotten laryngitis. He's been asked to speak so much on radio that his voice has given out. That is not a problem that I have. So I am here in his stead, and I'm pouring one out for him.
Yeah, well done. We're grateful to you, Richie, because Melina was going to be here with Dave. We were going to do a tripod then. Richie tagged in for super sick Dave. Sickened Dave, probably sickened by some of the election TV we watched on Wednesday. But so thank you very much, Richie, for tagging in at the last second. Melina, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for the team that makes Planet America. I, as you've mentioned, joined the team in the past few months, and
you're the breakout star.
Thank you. But I've really enjoyed being a part of it. I've loved the show since it started over a decade ago. I'm grateful to you and John, obviously, for having me on. I don't take that for granted, given you've been doing it, just the two of you, for over a decade. But I also wanted to shout out how grateful I am for the people who make the show behind the scenes. Everyone involved, I'm not going to name literally everyone involved in the show, but particularly Dave, Sarah, Keely, Tom, and around election time, Steve, who are involved in helping me make my segment. Because even though technically everyone's making the same total amount of TV show, it is extra work having an extra element in the show, and it is such a great team that makes the show. They do so much with not a lot of resources compared to some of the things that people are used to watching on TV. It's super impressive. They are just amazing to work with, and so I'm really grateful for them and everything they do to help me week to week with my seg and the show in general.
That's very nice.
Of course, none of them listen to PEP, so they'll never know I said it.
we'll have to clip it out for them. That's really nice, and they do a great job. I would say they run on an oily rag, but we cannot afford oily rags on our show. It's just a waste of money. That's a luxury we cannot afford. I am grateful for, well, look, it's been a harrowing election campaign and now post-election period at times. And every now and then you need just a break. You just need a little time out. So just something to lighten the mood. And I had the perfect example of this with about 2 days before the election. And I'm so grateful to it. I'm grateful to Ryan Fournier for providing this light moment for all of us, for all of mankind, really. The whole of America needed this, and Ryan Fournier provided it. Now, for those who don't know who Ryan Fournier is, he founded and runs Students for Trump. And like all conservatives running a student organization, he's approximately 120 years old, much like Charlie Cooke. I think he's like 28. Anyway, he's got 2 claims to fame, Ryan Fournier. One is that he famously launched a boycott against Walmart for selling shirts labeled Impeach 45. It was hashtag boycott Walmart, in case you're interested. That's the first thing he's famous for. The second thing he's famous for is assaulting his girlfriend. And that's the way he rolls. He's one of those guys. And I should say the charges were dropped. Sorry, allegedly assaulting his girlfriend, and he's charged for it, and then the charges were dropped. I'm sure he was innocent. He's a pretty dubious individual. Anyway, Ryan Fournier. And this week, or last week, he had an amazing moment on Twitter, which I am grateful for. Quote, first tweet, I just got some recent polls sent to me. Holy shit, we're going to win this. People do not want Kamala Harris. This is incredible. That's the first tweet. Next tweet. He includes the email from his source, his top secret source. Now, for those who are watching, I'm putting all this stuff up. For those who are watching, you can see that the name of his top secret source, of course, is blacked out. We don't want everyone hassling the source with their great gear. And so he just passes on the email with the polling from his source, and it looks pretty favorable to Trump, this polling. So he's not lying. It's incredible. Holy shit. Unfortunately, if we pan down a little bit on that email, you'll see the community note underneath it that says, quote, increasing the brightness on the picture reveals that Ryan wrote the letter to himself. And indeed, when you turn up the brightness, you can see Ryan Fournier's name underneath the blackened section of the email. Now, Ryan didn't like that. So then he tweeted again saying, as you can see, what does this email say in reference to my name? Nothing. You're going to believe what you're going to believe what you believe. We're all Americans, whether we agree or disagree on every issue. This is just the information I was fed tonight. We're all Americans, guys. Let's not fight. Let's not note. Let's all get along and just enjoy this polling given to us from this super secret source. I don't think Ryan fully understood the community note because he wasn't really rebutting it. And then he went on a Spaces and he kept on talking about it, and he clearly didn't really understand what was going on. This is what he had to say.
And I got a guy who his first name also starts with R, and I just took a screenshot. And now I have people coming at me, in the last 15, 20, 30 minutes. I mean, they're really rapid. They do not want to deal with the fact that they're losing.
Yeah, so Ryan didn't fully understand it. You could see his entire name there. He thought you could just see an R. So he doubled down, and that's probably tripling down at this point. And then he got dunked on so hard, he finally deleted everything, all the evidence. But the punchline of this is I want to draw your attention back to that email, the original email from the super secret source that was Ryan Fournier. Let's look at the polls, shall we? Georgia, Trump plus 3.1. Iowa, Trump plus 3. Pennsylvania, Trump plus 2.8. Arizona, Trump plus 1.8. North Carolina, Trump plus 1.6. Michigan, Trump plus 0.9. Wisconsin, Harris plus 1.8. I think Ryan Fournier might be the best pollster in America. It wasn't far off.
He wasn't far off. He was actually a little kind to Harris by giving her Wisconsin.
Yes, that's an indication of just how much we misevaluated the state of affairs, because that seemed hilariously pro-Trump. But as you say, it was actually pro-Harris slightly in the end. So there you go. Anyway, I was very grateful to Ryan Fournier for that.
Speaking of, I was going to say how assured PEP has been, and that anyone who listened to PEP, as I do, would not be especially surprised by this result, because these trends have been talked about for a long time. And I was going to say that, in fact, everybody here had correctly privately predicted a Trump victory. Certainly last time you and I spoke about this, you had predicted a Trump victory. And I find out that you huffed a massive amount of liberal copium on the morning of the election and incorrectly panicked and predicted a Harris win. Is this true?
I literally, for the past 12 months, have been saying that I thought Trump would win and would probably just win the blue wall again. I've been saying it for 12 months. Literally the morning of the election, I woke up. I was breaking down some polls and I noticed a trend which got me excited because I was the only one who'd noticed it, which was if you went through the last 6 polls, 6 proper polls, and you compared the second last version of each of those polls to the last version, the independents were favouring Harris by more in each of them. And I thought, oh, there's some late movement here in the independents. She's going to win the independents and maybe she's going to win. And so I then went on. I spoke to Fev on on breakfast radio. Fev, who unsurprisingly is a big gambler and had I think he put his house on Trump, and he wasn't happy with what I had to say about saying, I've changed my mind. I think that Harris is going to do it, and he just rubbished me, and he was right.
This is, you know more about US politics than almost anybody in the world. And you were a worse picker of the winner than Ryan Fournier and Fev.
Yeah, I got outthunk by Brendan Favola, who's not known for outthinking many people. So,
well, this is the story of the election, isn't it? That elite's getting it wrong. So,
anyway, I have to take my lumps on that one, I'm afraid. Oh, by the way, before we get into what happened, which is the next thing we're going to get into. Oh, by the way, this is just an election special. We're only going to talk about the election. I should note that, strangely, on the last PEP video on YouTube started running ads on us. Those ads aren't from us. YouTube, we should be flattered, I guess, that YouTube has wanted to start exploiting us for profit. Obviously, that's a good sign of the people viewing. But just so you know, I mean, we would like to get to do ads at some point in time, but they're not our ads. So at some point in time, we'll work that out. But just in the meantime, you can enjoy one on YouTube there. Let's start off with what actually happened, and then we can start to try and explain it.
Well, we should hear from someone who was right. Melina, what?
Melina, what happened?
What happened?
I'm actually annoyed. One, I had been predicting for a long time that Trump would win, but more quietly predicting that I would sooner bet on a Trump blowout than a Harris victory. And I wish I'd said that more, because then I really would have been on record in a good way. But I think a lot of things happened. I mean, like, there's already like a lot of think pieces with everyone trying to say, you know, Harris lost because of this, Trump won because of this. And in reality, 70 million plus people voted for Trump. That's going to be for a lot of different reasons. And, you know, we can get into all of that in more detail as the podcast goes on. But, you know, I think the first kind of fallacy is to try and ascribe it to one singular thing that's happening. Obviously, everyone's saying, you know, the economy is a big thing. Obviously, it was. I think another big issue was that people are clearly unhappy in general in America with the way things are going and have been for a long time, decades now. And people are not interested in voting for incrementalism. People want big changes. And I can understand that. And I think you can see Trump, but also Obama in that pattern of people coming in promising to shake up Washington and be really different and have sort of a big vision for how to change the country. And Biden, I think, is the exception to the trend, even though he's kind of the more traditional politician in the broader arc of recent history, sort of more mid to recent history. I think in the sense that, you know, 2020 was the COVID election, things were so crazy just that specific year that people wanted a break and wanted to feel like they could go back to normal for a little bit. But more broadly over the past 20 years, I think we've seen a lot of frustration in the electorate and a lot of push for significant change. And I think Kamala Harris's political instincts are all about incrementalism, and she's not a big vision politician. And I don't mean that as a knock. Like, I think that there's definitely room in politics for people who are more about making small incremental changes. They're probably better suited politically to the Senate than the presidency, where people do look for the sort of bigger visionary speakers as a rule. And she also didn't have the long track record of someone like Biden, who did have the relationships on the Senate to achieve more from a policy perspective. But I think that fundamentally people were not looking for someone who was promising to defend the status quo, but rather someone who's promising to upend it, and that was a big part of it too. And the other just opening point I want to make is that at the end of the day, Trump's lie worked about not losing the 2020 election. It's you never know if he had accepted the last election. He'd accepted the loss and said, but I'm going to come back and try again. Maybe he would have become the nominee again in that circumstance too. But the big gamble he made was to just not accept that he lost, repeat over and over again that he won. And I think that anger and that energy carried him through to the presidency again. And so people can criticize that lie all they want, but it worked out for Trump.
That's a really good point. But before we just go on, I should just say what happened.
Trump won.
yeah. Okay, so there's still Nevada and Arizona out, although Trump's going to win both of them. It's looking very much like Trump's won 312 electoral college votes to 226 for Kamala Harris. Essentially, the difference between this election and the last one is that Biden won Nevada, he won Arizona, he won Georgia. They're all gone back to Trump, and also Trump's taken the blue wall, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which means the map is basically identical to the Hillary Clinton map back in 2016. I think she took Nevada, so it's slightly worse than hers. Although electoral college wise, the numbers have all changed because they've been redistributed since then, so it doesn't quite compare. But basically, Harris is one state worse than Hillary Clinton in 2016. In terms of turnout, I mean, that's still going for a while. Please, just a little request, folks. Can you stop sending around that stupid meme about how much turnout has dropped off since 2020? Like, I'll just put it up. I've received this from about 4 different Trump supporters on our Facebook page. I get it, okay? It's like, for those who are listening, it's a graph that shows how the Democrats received about 65 million votes in 2012, 2016, and 2024. And then in 2020, they received 81 million votes. And the caption asks, where did 20 million voters go? Great question. If that was the end of the count, but that was day one. Like, already the Democrats they're not at 65 million anymore. They're at, the latest count is they're at 70 million. Oh, sorry, 69 million already. And that's going to keep on adding for like a week because California's got heaps more to go. And also there's some graft crimes committed there as well with the Axis, and graft crimes make me very angry. I don't want to describe the graft crimes because I might start to swear. They deserve the death penalty. Graft crimes. Anyway, but then we've also got the House is currently at 210 to 199. So looking very much like the Republicans are going to take the House, but only by maybe 3 to 6 seats, I would say, at this stage. So we're looking at basically the same House as we've currently got right now, which may or may not be as dysfunctional as it is right now. I think when Trump's there, it may be less dysfunctional. And the Senate today, it ticked over to 53 seats to Republicans, but the Pennsylvania just went down. And that was a massive moment, I think, because, I mean, we'll probably talk more about this when we talk about the future, but the difference between the Republicans holding 3 seats and the Republicans holding 2 seats is significant because there are 2 moderates in the Senate, in Murkowski and Collins. And as it was before Pennsylvania, they just need 1 more vote to block anything. Now they need 2 more votes, which is a lot harder to get than 1 more vote. So the fact that today Pennsylvania fell, that might be the difference between Mike Flynn getting appointed to something, or like some crazy person. So we'll see about that. So that's basically the state of play. As in terms of just general descriptions of what's going on there is a swing across the country. I'll show you a map from the New York Times. You can see those arrows are signifying the swing since the last election. You can see There's red arrows pretty much all over the country, although the West Coast hasn't been filled out yet because they're still counting. There's a lot of red arrows there. It's a uniform swing, essentially. It's not just in red states and blue states. It's also in blue areas and red areas. Like, for instance, the cities significantly redder as well. I'll get into some details of that later on as well. Also, if we're comparing the Senate results to the presidential results, the senators outperformed Harris pretty much across the board. In Nebraska, the Osborne vote share, I know he's not a Democrat, but still, is about 7 points higher than Harris. In Montana, Tester, his vote share was 7 points higher than Harris. In Ohio, Brown's vote share was 4 points higher than Harris. All these people lost, by the way, but they still went better than Harris. Gallego, in the, however you say it, in Arizona, going at 4 points higher than Harris. Texas, Ulrich, who lost, went 3 points higher than Harris. Nevada, Jackie Rosen was going 2 points higher than Harris. Wisconsin, Baldwin is going 1 point higher than Harris. And Michigan and Pennsylvania are less than a point, but more than Harris. What are your thoughts so far?
So this is on paper, before we even get to who it is and the kind of hold that they have over their party and their voters. On paper, this is one of the most powerful presidencies since FDR. It's effectively a second term, we're not going to say incumbent. It's a Grover Cleveland style comeback, which has not happened for over a century. Holding the House, holding the Senate, and with a Supreme Court understanding of his power that is pretty much unprecedented. So this is, a very, very powerful presidency before we get to the fact that that is held by Donald Trump, who has a lot of additional cultural powers behind him. On paper, this is also a catastrophe for liberalism. The Democrats, is it a catastrophe for Kamala Harris personally? I think it's a sign that she ran an okay campaign, given the circumstances. It's not dazzling, but she was really given a very challenging situation to deal with and has done roughly as well as Hillary Clinton. So not very well, but kind of par for a losing Democrat. I think that the Senate drop-off is not an indictment on her. And I'd love to hear what Melina thinks of her performance and the picture overall.
Well, before you say that, Melina, can I also ask you that question that Richie just hand passed to you? Do you think the fact that the senators overperformed Kamala Harris? Normally it's the other way around. In the Trump era until now, it was Republican senators overperforming Trump because Trump was a drag on the ticket. There were people who wouldn't vote for Trump but would vote for Republicans. But now it's the opposite. Do you see that as an indication that Kamala Harris was a drag on the Democrats, or an indication that Trump has now become genuinely popular and is a positive for the Republicans, or something else entirely?
I think that I wouldn't say it was Harris being a drag. That's not, I mean, look, I don't know for sure, but that's not my instinct. I think it's probably more a reflection of those senators, them being nearly, I think all the ones you mentioned, incumbents, and probably having to some extent a personal brand and reputation in that state that carried them a little further than Harris, who is relatively unknown, to be honest. Like, obviously she's been on the scene for a while, but she hasn't been a high profile national figure in her own right, bearing in mind that when you're a vice president, you don't get to run your own agenda for very long at all. And so I think that it reflects less a negativity about Harris, who generally improved her ratings, and I think by the end had a better approval rating, or, approval rating than Trump. It's less about people not liking her and more about people not knowing her and having a greater comfort level with particular senators. And maybe to some extent, people liking the idea of the number of ticket splitters gets smaller every cycle, but some people still do, I think, follow that logic of, let's vote for one person at the top, but have a check on that, a balance on that with this person who's fairly moderate in between. And all of those senators as well, being in swing states, are very attuned to the politics of those states, are generally very moderate. And so I think have a little bit more inbuilt popularity and trust with kind of middle of middle ground voters. And I think it's probably a reflection of that.
Two things. You're asking about the favourabilities. From the exit polls, it's quite interesting actually. They're all bunched up together. Harris was at 47% favourability on the exit poll. Trump was at 46% favourability in the exit poll, which is a lot better than he used to be. Vance was 47% favourability on the exit poll, and Walls was 45% favourability. So Vance ended up being more popular than Walls in the end, and in fact ended up being as popular as Harris. So Vance got there in the end. I do for what it's worth, I actually think Trump has become, I wouldn't go popular, but more popular. I think he is definitely the most popular he has been in his 8 years at the moment. And I think the reasons for that is, I'm getting ahead of myself again. I think it's a combination of nostalgia for his first term, and also the fact that we're getting to the point now where lots of people are too young to remember the beginnings of Trump. Like we saw during the election campaign, all these kids on TikTok having a look at the Access Hollywood tape going, oh my God, why didn't anyone tell us about this? and like for us, you just go, well, yeah, well, of course, everyone knows about that. But, you know, people under 23 or 24 probably don't know that. And I think that, you know, they're now voters and they pollute the pool. And so I think that's part of the reason he does well with kids. And I think it's part of the reason why his favourabilities have been improving. People have either forgotten or never knew a whole bunch of stuff about him.
I think that is true of kids. I don't think it is true of some demographics we have talked about a fair bit on this show, which have turned out to be as important as we expected, which is that so far it looks like Trump has very significantly improved his showing with Latinos and African Americans, and particularly the men from those groups.
Yes.
So we've talked about this election as a race between Harris getting white women and Trump getting Latino and black men. It looks as though that was important and that Trump won that race pretty definitively.
Big time.
Yeah.
Young men too.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're going to be talking a bit about this and the reasons why. Because this also is where the picture around the economy gets a bit more complicated. That is a huge factor in this election, and something, we've talked about previously, especially incumbents being punished for inflation. But inflation tends to hit women worse, and it tends to hit...
Why is that?
For a variety of reasons around the kinds of spending that they do and the kinds of wages that they earn.
Of course. Yeah.
But yeah, and that's true to a degree of racial minorities as well. So naturally, we can't just go, oh, these people wanted to do this extra. It hit them all the same or in similar ways, and they've responded to it differently. So this is when the culture aspect starts to come out. So before we get to that big picture, Chaz, I wanted to ask, do you think Harris did a good job as a campaigner? Do you think this is par, or is this a disastrous result for her personally?
I think Kamala Harris did an excellent job of what she was trying to do.
Yeah.
I think that she's a good soldier. I think when she's told to do something, she executes it perfectly. I think that they had a strategy and a plan, and she followed it through. I think that that strategy was designed around her strengths and weaknesses, and the weaknesses that frustrate people about her as a politician, her strategy was designed to avoid those weaknesses. And I think she did a good job of executing that. There were parts of that strategy that I didn't like, which I will get into. I mean, you already know it. I've said it before. I'll just say it again. But I think that, and I don't think she lost because of any of that.
No.
Once again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think this result was baked into the cake a long time ago. And maybe if she had done some of the things that I would have preferred her to do, or done some things differently in the way that I would have liked her to have done, it might have made a 0.5 point difference here or there. But no, she was losing anyway, is my opinion. until the day of the bloody election. That was my opinion. But anyway, we will talk more about this, and we're definitely going to get into the polling. You will be unsurprised to hear I'm all over the exit polling. But once again, just before we get into the polls errors, there is one thing we should talk about if we're talking about what actually happened, which is the ballot questions.
Yep.
Before we move on. I know, Melina, you're all over that.
Yes. So in particular, I mean, there were obviously a lot of ballot measures across all the different states. But the two in particular that I think we just wanted to touch on quickly. One was ranked choice voting, which was on the ballot in 7 states and rejected everywhere except one. Alaska had brought it in via ballot initiative in 2020, and it now looks as though they've repealed it at the subsequent election. It's currently at 51% to 49% with 76% of votes counted. So it's not 100% decided, but it seems to have kind of, since I checked that again today, it doesn't seem to have shifted significantly from Wednesday night. So it sort of seems to be heading in that direction. It was also rejected in Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, and Missouri, although Missouri was a little bit cheeky because they combined their question with a question about banning non-citizen voting, which was voted down in every state that was on the ballot. It was in 8 states. So they were basically like, would you like to ban ranked choice voting and non-citizens from voting in elections, yes or no? So, sure. I mean, I'm sure it would have gone down anyway, given it went down in all these other states, but I find that a slightly cheeky combination of things. And then it was approved in Washington, D.C. by 73%. So, I mean, it kind of makes it seem like it's becoming a partisan issue in a sense. It's perceived as a left-wing thing. But, I mean, it went down in Oregon and Colorado as well. So it just seems to generally not be the vibe of Americans.
Just to put this in context, I believe isn't Oregon the state that legalized all drugs not too long ago? Like literally everything. like all kinds of psychedelics and heroines and just I don't quote me on that. There may be a couple that they didn't legalize meth. I'm not sure. They seem to legalize a lot of drugs not too long ago, and they're not legalizing ranked choice voting.
Yeah.
So
they've drawn a line.
Yeah. Yes.
Or they are all too high to show up at the polls.
That's really depressing.
And the other big issue, or there were a number of big issues, but the biggest one was abortion, which was on the ballot in 10 states, 11 measures because Nebraska had 2 competing ones. So just to paint a picture of where the various states moved in the vote, generally most states voted in favor of the pro-abortion side of the various amendments, but specifically Missouri went from a full ban to legalization to the point of viability, so that's quite a significant change. Arizona goes from a 15-week ban to it being allowed up to viability. Colorado, Maryland, and New York will get broader protections. It was already broadly legal in all of those states, but they've just kind of formalize those protections in various ways. Montana also cemented their current standard of it being legal up until viability. Nevada voted for the same to enshrine the current standard of viability, but they have to vote on it again in 2026 for it to become a law. It has to pass twice there by their rules. Nebraska is the state that had 2 ballot initiatives, one which would have enshrined the 12-week, they have a current 12-week ban in that state, so one would lock that in at 12 weeks, and the other would have expanded access to the second trimester or viability. They voted to keep the 12-week ban, although they defeated the second trimester one by a smaller margin, so there does seem to have been a bit of confusion there. So, I mean, that's I suppose, a vote against expanding abortion rights, but 12-week bans is also not the strictest compared to some of the other states that we see. South Dakota has a near total ban, except to save a woman's life, and they voted to uphold that 59% to 41%. So that was the only state that voted really affirmatively against abortion rights. And Florida voted 57% to 43% to expand abortion rights from their current 6-week ban to viability. But in Florida, you need to get 60% to pass. So even though 57% is quite an overwhelming majority, that did not pass, and they still stay with their 6-week ban.
And just to be clear, that 60%, that wasn't like chiseled in stone by Moses. That was relatively recently passed in order to stop people getting ballot amendments up. So it worked.
Yeah. They had one about legalizing marijuana too that basically got the same margin and also will not pass. But I mean, it paints an interesting picture, all the abortion questions, because there was a logic earlier in the year that having abortion on the ballot in all these states might bring up turnout for Democrats and improve their chances. And it may have made no difference either way, but if anything now, the conventional wisdom is shifting to the idea that perhaps it's, if anything, unhelpful, because voters in states like, say, Arizona felt that they could vote for Trump and vote for abortion rights, and that they weren't voting against their rights as women by voting for Trump in this instance, even though he's the one who appointed the judges that overturned Roe v. Wade. They didn't hold a grudge. They didn't see him as personally anti-abortion. And they, it went back to the states as everyone wanted, as Trump would say. And people have been able to have their say in a lot of states and vote accordingly.
I have a question for either you or Richie, whichever one of you wants to answer it, maybe both. When we're talking about ballot amendments, Missouri had a really interesting slate of ballot amendments because they, as you said, they overturned their total abortion ban. They legalized abortion up to fetal viability by 3 points, that was. They increased the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That got up by 15%. And they also blocked a wage rise for the police, of all things, which got up by 20 points. So this is a super red state, Missouri. Josh Hawley won by 14 points in this same election. That they basically went Bernie Sanders on their 3 times on their ballot amendments, ballot questions. Is that evidence of a messaging failure by Democrats that red staters vote for their policies on ballot questions but don't vote for their politicians? Or is it just evidence that policies don't matter at all in elections?
That's a great question. One of the strengths of Trump as a political campaigner is that people are able to project their own desires onto him. He's such a rambler. He changes positions so often. He has chum in the water for so many different constituencies that you can get into a little bit of magical thinking territory around how he's going to help you out. I don't think all of that is incoherent either. I think people see him as a really strong negotiator. So they sort of imagine him as someone making a deal on their behalf, which they may not agree with, but they think has been constructed fairly, could be the wrong word, but they trust him to do it, partly because he knows how to play dirty on their behalf. I mean, you always hear that US politics is about people who broadly supportive of social liberalism to a higher degree than you would anticipate. I mean, Alabama legalized gay marriage before Australia did, for example. But that at the federal level, it doesn't. At the presidential level, it doesn't. Again, I'm not sure that that's completely incoherent. This is what the American system is supposed to do, to give you this kind of federalized pick and mix where you can experiment. You can change your mind, and that the presidency is really a vote for other things rather than all of these things to become federal policy.
Fair enough. Do you have any thoughts, Melina?
I mean, one of the reasons that Trump has been so successful in the first instance was that he recognized that many Republican politicians were not meeting their voters where they are, and that there was a failure of Republican messaging as well in terms of reaching the people who voted for Republicans. I think it's probably partly a reflection of the fact that there are many policies on many issues, and no one is going to agree with a party sort of slate of policies at any given time. People probably also do overestimate how important policies are to people on any given cycle. The sort of broad grab bag of policies that a party presents to people probably is a failure of messaging to an extent as well. And sometimes also a policy can be really popular in theory and just is not executed at a political level for a lot of reasons. Like I'm thinking, for example, of a lot of policies around gun control that poll really well and never happen because there are interest groups that have a lot of power, or, maybe something is popular with the population, but it's unpopular with a majority of one party, and so then that party has a incentive to block it, and even though it's half of half that actually feel that way. So I think there are a lot of structural reasons as well why the will of the voters is often not reflected by politicians on both sides.
Yeah, I wasn't going to talk about this, but since you brought it up with that answer,
Stats Nugget.
honestly, I wasn't ready for this. You're going to see I don't have any details. I'm just going to say a study says, because I wasn't ready for this one at all. But a study says, I've got a graph for you. Have a look at this from a study. Take a guess what percentage of Americans need to agree on a policy for it to have a 50% chance to get enacted, according to history.
According to history.
And a study.
There are some similar studies which have showed that popular opinion is almost completely irrelevant for the passing of policy once you discount interest groups. Like apparently if you weight against interest groups, public opinion has zero influence. So I would imagine it's very high before it has to hit pay dirt.
You must have read this study. The answer is it takes about 90% of Americans to agree on some policy for it to have a 50% chance of getting enacted, according to history from this study. I really wish I had the detail. But you see what I mean? It's right down the alley of what you just said. It's incredible. I was saving that for a stats nugget for somewhere down the track. But yeah, hey, you can look up the study if you want. Let's get into the exit polls, shall we? Now, I know the next thing is on our agenda is polling, but the polling involves me talking a lot, and I've talked enough already. So we'll do that a little bit later. We'll come back to polling generally, but let's go into the exit polls because we can all talk about that. First of all, can I just say, let's all try to not fall into the trap of just interpreting everything as vindicating our personal viewpoints, which is what everyone does with exit polls. So I'll try to do my best. Okay, so I'll tell you an exit poll, and then you guys say what you think about that. With your thoughts, unless you already have some of your own favorites. Do you guys have favorites with you?
Yes.
I've brought some favorites.
Oh well, Melina, why don't you start?
All right. Well, the only thing is you probably have some more traditional ones, and I assumed you'd do that, so I've pulled out more random ones that interested me.
It's up to you. I can start. It's up to you.
Let's start with the fundamentals.
The basics. Okay, all right. Let's start with gender. Women have gone, all of these are comparing 2020 nationals to 2024 national exit polls, okay? Women have gone from 57% Democrat, 42% Republican in 2020 to 53% Democrat, 45% Republican in 2024. The turnout's gone from 52% to 53%, so not insignificant difference. So women have gone from a 15-point gap, 15-point passing gap, to an 8-point passing gap, with Republicans taking more of their vote. So this women's election, Republicans have actually gone up 3 points, and they've reduced the gap on Democrats. By contrast, men have gone from 53% Republican, 45% Democrat, to 55% Republican, 42% Democrat, with the turnout going from 48 to 47%, insignificant. So the men have gone from an 8-point gap in 2020 to a 13-point gap in 2024. The Republicans have gained 2 points of support amongst the men, and blown out the gap with Democrats, while at the same time, they have also gained with women on the gender gap. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that we'll touch on something now that we're going to be talking about a lot, I'm sure, which is that this is the penalization of incumbents for inflation, partially. This is an effect which is worldwide. It's not just in the US. There's a recent study, I'm not going to call it a study, it is a study from the Financial Times, which shows that this is the worst year, 2024 is the single worst year electorally in developed countries for incumbents ever. There has never been literally never been a worse time in history to be an incumbent in a developed country than 2024.
That's good.
There is something about overseeing COVID-related inflation that just drives voters berserk.
That's really good.
There is, in fact, it looks as though compared to Europe and other elections we've seen this year, this effect in the US, probably for partisan reasons, has been relatively mild. So Harris may have saved the furniture a little bit. So I guess Melina, I'm sure, has something to say about the gender discrepancy in these.
So you're saying you don't think it's got anything to do with gender at all?
No, I do. Absolutely. I think there's an umbrella effect, but it also is hitting men and women differently. So when we talk about that difference is when we can start to tease out the cultural issues which complicate this. You know, I think the incumbent was going to lose for that reason alone, but it's losing at different rates with different people for a bunch of reasons we're going to be talking about tonight.
You got thoughts about the gender gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think those numbers that you say reflect, as Richie's saying, the fundamentals were against the incumbent, and you're just seeing in general men and women moving against the incumbent. Those are numbers that are just, this party has lost the election. But the reason it stands out is that part of the analysis and the campaign's strategy, the Harris campaign strategy through the election, was this idea that you could buck all of those trends that they were up against, the kind of more traditional trends, by motivating women because of the abortion issue and because Trump alienates lots of women because of the way he speaks and acts. And that ended up not happening in a meaningful way. Obviously, there was a gender gap, but there's been a gender gap for a while. And that gap is closed. Like more women did vote for Trump this time around. And so I think that it suggests that the sort of gender campaign didn't pay off.
Okay, I'll go into race. There's a lot here. Start with black people, black voters. They went from 87% Democrat, 12% Republican in 2020 to 85% Democrat, 13% Republican in 2024. Turnout dropped from 13% to 11%. So they really did, as a proportion, they didn't really change very much at all, black voters, despite all the hype throughout the election campaign. But the turnout did drop 2%, which may just be exit polls being inaccurate, or it may be black voters staying home. Because if that's actually reflective of the truth, that's 2% out of 13%. That's a 15% drop off. Like if that's actually reflective. So that could be significant. Let's break that down by sex and race. Black women gone from 90 Democrat, 9 Republican to 91 Democrat, 7 Republican. So they actually voted more for the Democrats this election. Black men went from 79-19 to 77-21. So they dropped off just a smidge, just the tiniest amount, so much less than people were speculating they would throughout this election campaign. There's only one place where there was actually a significant peel off of black voters to the Republicans, in Wisconsin, where the black vote went from 8% Republican to 20% Republican. And I have no idea why. And, I don't know if that's related to George Floyd. I don't know. I know he's not in Wisconsin, but yeah, next door. I don't know I don't know why that is. But
that could just be an exit poll anomaly.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be. Latinos was obviously the big ticket event in this election. They went from 65% Democrat, 32% Republican, to 52% Democrat, 46% Republican, with turnout going from 13% to 12%, insignificant. So they went from a 33-point Democrat advantage to a 6-point Democrat advantage, which is a massive diminution. That's definitely not exit poll interference. Let's break that down by sex and race. Latino women went from 69 Democrat, 30 Republican to 60 Democrat, 38 Republican. And so that's gone from a 39-point Democrat advantage to a 22-point Democrat advantage. Latino men went from 36 Republican, 59 Democrat to 55 Republican, 43 Democrat. So it went from a 23-point Democrat advantage to a 12-point Republican advantage, a 35-point turnaround in 4 years. And that's reflected in some counties. Miami-Dade was won by Hillary Clinton by 30 points. Biden won it by 7 points. Trump won it by 11 points. He's the first Republican to win since 1988. Trump won Starr County on the Rio Grande, which is 97% Hispanic, by 16 points. The last time a Republican won Starr County was in 1892. Any thoughts so far?
Yeah, look, Starr County is at the top of my list as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So in 2016, Hillary Clinton, this is the single most Hispanic district in the United States.
Yeah.
It's right on the border. And Hillary Clinton won it. Her vote percentage was 79% when she won it in 2016. And Trump has won it by almost 58%. I mean, that is an incredible bellwether result, which shows you this almost inversion of the Latino vote, especially in particular areas. And that is not inflation. That is not incumbent punishment. That is something else. In particular, on the border, apart from the other obvious cultural issues, that is immigration. That is a Latino anti-immigration or, Latino nativist element of the Trump support base, which is becoming bigger and bigger.
I spoke to Mike Madrid, who's a ex-Lincoln Project. I'd love to see him in Lincoln Park. An ex-Lincoln Project dude, ex-Lincoln Project founder, whose specialty is Latino votes. He's also Latino. And his theory about this, I haven't talked to him since the election. I talked to him just before the election. He was very nervous about the Latino vote. He was saying that the Latino vote is entirely economic, and that they're not motivated by cultural issues at all. They're motivated by economics. And he said, and the reason he was so worried is he said the economy's not great at the moment. This is the kind of time when Latinos turn out against you, because they follow the economy. Do you pay heed to that? Do you think that this just means that they're going to flip around in the next election or two again, or do you think that this might be a permanent realignment because of things like immigration?
Yeah, look, I think the picture is more complicated than that. I don't believe that. I mean, I've been to Starr County. I don't believe that people there, especially there are a lot of people there who work for CBP, Customs and Border Protection, and they are watching record border crossings. I don't think that's exclusively an economic issue at all. I think that economics gives it a tailwind, but this is also a cultural and immigration issue, which is also part of what's hurt Biden and Harris very badly.
Do you have any thoughts about any of this, Melina?
Yeah, I would add that Latinos are a really diverse group of people who come from lots of different countries and have been in America for, sometimes one generation, sometimes five. Some were there before America was America. And so I think that makes them hard to pin down. And, when you bunch them together as a group, they do swing between cycles. And even though Democrats have done well with Latinos the past few cycles, George Bush got 44%. In 2004. And Trump has done, credit where it's due. He's done very well with Latinos. 46 is a great showing for a Republican, but it's not that far off 44%. So it's not like this is outside of the realm of anything that we've seen before. And politicians on both sides really love to take one good showing with Latinos and decide that demographically, politically, culturally, they'll get to own them forever. Republicans and the Karl Rove era was saying, Latinos are Republicans, they just don't know it yet. They're Catholics, they're conservatives, they're anti-abortion, they're upwardly mobile, pro-capitalism, and so they're our voters. And, now that we've got this good percentage of them, it's only up from here, and we're going to have them forever. And then we'll have the permanent majority, and then Obama and Clinton turn it around, and suddenly it's diverse voters go for Democrats, and therefore now that we've non-white, there's going to be a non-white majority in America, we'll win every election forever. And it's just obviously not the case. And I think that's for a lot of reasons, because you're talking about lots of different voters that have very different status in the country, different motivations, different circumstances. And anytime politicians try to sort of jump on a singular result in a singular cycle and think that that means that they can take something for granted in future cycles, get nasty shocks in those future cycles. So yeah, I think it's significant, the percentage that Trump has won, but we also shouldn't assume that that means something that's unchanging going forward, beyond the fact that politicians on both sides need to work for those voters.
Do we have any views about what this means for the diversity agenda of Democrats? Like if there's a situation where, even if it's temporary, where Latinos or Hispanics temporarily become Republican, does that undermine the social politics of the Democrats?
I just want to add, I was looking at just for context, we might be looking at different exit polls. I've been looking at the NBC one. But
well, they should be the same.
I've seen, lots of people say, Trump won the election because he won people of color. It's black and Hispanics who voted for Trump in the free one. I mean, that's objectively not true. He won a majority of white voters. He didn't win a majority of Latinos. He certainly didn't win a majority of black voters. He won more, and that was important in his victory. But white voters are overwhelmingly still his best demographic group, and Democrats still have won a majority of people of color. And so I think it's just important not to overstate, even though it's significant and it maybe signals a change. It doesn't mean that Republicans and Trump are suddenly, the party of people of color, overwhelmingly. I mean, the one caveat I should say is that according to this exit poll, he won a very big majority of Native Americans, but I'm not sure what the sample size was for that.
Yes, it's probably quite small.
I think, I agree. What is especially significant about these trends, and the reason why I think that, first of all, these are the kind of voter equivalent of swing states in some ways, that, these are the demographics that can be fought over. If you can peel these people off their, I won't say traditional exactly, but the constituencies in the way we expect them to form. If you can take a voter from someone else, that's always very valuable. But also, especially the way that the media and political class think about this, these are supposed to be the voters that Trump has insulted to the extent that he would never vote for. They would never vote for him. And I have an incredible example of this, which I'm not sure if you guys have encountered yet. And I will say that this result is provisional, okay? Mm-hmm. But this is Dearborn, Michigan, okay? Yeah. This is pretty much the most Muslim city in the United States. Yeah. It's outside of Detroit. And there is a Gaza protest vote there against the Biden government's policies in the Middle East. But that protest vote is going to Donald Muslim ban Trump. And it is going to Trump by, he got 42 points. Jill Stein got 18 points. Yep. And Harris got 31. Yeah. So, I don't think that we can say yet that the Republicans are a multicultural coalition, but they are much, much more multicultural than they have been for a long time. These is, significantly more multicultural than the Republicans were during the Bush outreach period. They're winning more Latinos than they have since 1975. And this is with the most racist candidate in living memory. That is huge.
With Dearborn, not only was there the Muslim ban, Trump was so pro-Israel in his first term, there's a settlement named after him in the Golan Heights.
That's right.
So it's quite a turnaround.
We should say, by the way, that in 2020, Biden won Dearborn 74-24, to give some context there. And even Rashida Tlaib only got 62% of the vote in Dearborn. They're punishing her as well.
Yeah.
But that's another group that changed in the intervening years between Bush, because a majority of Muslims went for George W. Bush in 2000. And you can use your imagination what might have changed their mind in the years since. But that's a group that previously did feel at home in the Republican Party and changed because of external circumstances and looks to be changing again.
So I might as well just continue on with the Gaza thing while given that we've begun it. I should also say, because I was looking hard to see if there was a Gaza protest vote in the exit polls in Michigan. The 18 to 29s in Michigan were Republican 49, Democrat 49, compared to the national 18 to 29s, which are Republican 43, Democrat 54. So that's a 6-point turnaround amongst the young. That could well be a protest vote there. The turnout didn't change from 12% to 12%. They didn't stay home. Interestingly, if you look at the polls for they asked people about whether America was either too weak on Israel or too strong on Israel, too supportive of Israel. You'd think the too supportive of Israel would be where the protest vote is. There's only a 1% vote in there for that isn't Republican or Democrat. There's no third party vote in there, which I found interesting. Might be an exit poll thing though.
It might be an exit poll thing. There's also this is stuff which is very difficult to tease out in exit polls. I'm really happy Melina brought up the Trump settlement in the Golan Heights. Orthodox Jews are a very, very strong constituency. Until recently, if you looked and saw this, red patch in the middle of New York, that is Williamsburg, where the Hasidic Jews live. Voted heavily for Trump against Hillary Clinton, for example. Strangely, Trump seems to be able to have both hardcore Jews and hardcore Muslims choose him as an honest broker in the Middle East for peace, which is a sign both of his strong anti-war credentials in voters' minds and also maybe some of their wish casting.
Well, you said before, people take whatever they want from Trump, don't they? And just to finish off this little section here, Michigan has 211,000 Arab American residents to generalize past Dearborn, and about 241,000 Muslim residents. The margin so far is 80,000. So it may have made the difference. The uncommitted vote may well have made a difference in Michigan. Not that that mattered for the election, but for what it's worth.
Yes.
Yeah. We did speculate about that. It looks like it paid off.
Can I add one other interesting thing on the racial breakdowns?
Please.
Before
I've got more coming on the race.
Okay.
But
We'll
yeah,
go back
you
to
go.
that. People have talked a lot over the past 8 years about the education gap
Yep.
between Trump and Democrat candidates. And that's very true of white college and non-college graduates. In the case of white college graduates, they went 52% for Democrats, 45% Republican.
Yep.
White non-college graduates, 32% Harris, 66% Trump. So really big difference. It's not true for people of color. No. There's no education gap at all, effectively. Non-white college graduates voted 65% for Democrats, and non-white non-college graduates, 64%. So 1 percentage point difference. I found that really interesting. It's not really talked about particularly.
No, I think that's a really good point. And that actually goes even further because they're moving at the same rate as well. Like Hillary was plus 56 for the voters of color with no degree. Voters of color with a degree, Hillary was plus 50 for Democrats. Then Biden was plus 46 for no degree, plus 43 for degree. And now, as you said, Harris is plus 30 for no degree, plus 33 for degree. So the two lines are just progressing at the same rate with the same numbers. There's literally no difference at all for people of color with degrees and not degrees, which is weird that there's so much polarization for white people with degrees versus not degrees. It makes you think that maybe the polarization isn't about degrees at all. It might just be that white women with a college degree are a special group. They're a special Democrat group. And everyone else is gradually moving slightly right, which is interesting. That's a really good observation. Okay, some other race stuff just before we get off race. Asian people went from 61-34 to 54-39. So they're moving right as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, maybe everyone's moving right in this election. The only race, though, well, not everyone moved right. There was one race that moves left, white people. White people went from Republican 58, Democrat 41 to Republican 55, Democrat 43. So, and what also, this might be an exit poll thing, but I'm not sure it is. The turnout increased for white people as well, 67% to 71%. So 4% is a significant difference in turnout. So this electorate became more white, and at the same time they became more Democrat, the white people. Now, John has a theory about this. I'll throw it at you and see what you guys think. John's theory is twofold. Number one, the white women college voters who we talked about before. There's more of them now, and they're becoming more Democrat, and so more Democrats are white for that reason. But even more so, the Democrats are taking a bigger slice of old people, because old people vote more all the time, as we know, and now it's the boomers that are old people, and they're Democrats. They've been Democrats all their life. And if we look at the age stuff, which we're about to get to, old people are tied this election, which they haven't been for a long, long time. So old people are becoming more Democrat, and they're becoming. And since they're boomers, they're white, because boomers were white. Boomers weren't non-white. And so you got more white voters who are Democrats. Do you think that might be the reason why? Or do you think that there's some other reason why Democrats might be drawing white people?
I think that's a compelling theory. There, you could add to that, and we'll talk about this. There might be, if you looked at the small number of Republicans who defected as never Trumpers, they seem to be, for a variety of reasons, predominantly white Republicans. Yes. White suburban women in particular, they were the sort of the switches to Biden to some extent that helped him over the line. So it might be that some of those people are now sticking around.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think both of those theories are good and probably both contribute. I think Democrats have been explicitly targeting those kinds of voters over the last couple of cycles, and so it makes sense that they would get a bigger group. But also rings very true. My parents are of that generation, and they're big lefties, so that also rings very true to me.
Yeah. Okay, let's finish off age while I'm at it. 18 to 29s went from 60 to 30 to 54 to 43. Turnout went from 17% to 14%. So there was a drop off there in the 18 to 29s, whether that was a stay-at-home factor or just for whatever reason, they just weren't feeling it. And the Democrat advantage dropped from 30 points to 19 points. Unfortunately, we have no 2020 exit polls to compare the gender of 18 to 29s, because that's something which I think people are interested in. But I can tell you for the 2024 numbers, women 18 to 29s, 61% Democrat, 37% Republicans. That's a 24-point gap. Men 18 to 29s, Republicans won by 2 points. 49% Republican, 47% Democrat. So that's a 28-point gender gap we got there, which is, in fact, the biggest gender gap for any age group in the 18 to 29s. As I already told you, the 65 pluses went from Republican 52, Democrat 47, so 5-point gap for the Republicans to 49 all. And turnout went from 22% to 28%, a huge increase in old people voting in this election, which also might explain the extra white people with those boomers. And so my question to you is, well, first of all, do you have anything to add to this, or any explanation for what's going on here? Has Trump actually successfully tapped into the magic of young male voters, as people speculated? And also, while you're at it, is the old people, the huge turnout in old people versus the drop-off in the turnout of young people, is that reflective of some kind of movement in some direction? Is that reflective of young people staying at home, or is it reflective of some surge from old people for some reason? What do you think is going on?
It is very weird on paper when you hear it like that you go, you know what's really catnip for young people is Joe Biden and Donald Trump. They're the two of the oldest politicians in US history. One of them is so old that he's gone senile in office. And he's more popular with young voters than a young, vibrant attorney from California. I find that odd.
I'd like to know the comparison to 2016 as well, because I'd want to know that there wasn't something specific about 2020 with perhaps older people being more reluctant to go out to the polls with COVID raging.
Oh, that's a good one.
I'm not
Yep.
sure if that's the
You
case.
smart.
You'd have to look at 2016 to see whether 2020 was an aberration or whether it's 2024 that's an aberration.
I'll
But
do it right now.
There were a lot of extra pre-poll votes and postal votes, and they are traditionally forms of votings that old people love. So it seems, again, a little counterintuitive that I know that there are less of those kinds of votes this time around, but more old people seem to have voted in whatever format. It's funny, this kind of counterintuitive stuff that's a good thought, but I'm not sure if it will stick with the postal ballots.
yes, I don't say it with any confidence. I'm awaiting Chaz's fact check.
Yeah, this is really interesting, actually. I don't know what to make of this. The answer is the turnout in 2016 of 65 pluses was 16%. So it went from 16% to 22% to 28%. Now, what that might be telling us is that people are living longer, and older people are more active. Like they're living longer and healthier. That might be telling us that.
It might also be that generation is more political than the generations before them, because they're the generation that came of age in the 60s and 70s. Maybe they just inherently are more interested in politics than their parents and grandparents were, and that's carried through to older age.
Yeah. Maybe old people just like talking to exit posters more.
Yes, that is a real possibility. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Do we get into the strategy exit polling now, or do you have some interesting things, Melanie, you want to throw in here before I get into the Democrat and Republican strategies and exit polling?
One interesting thing that feels not worlds away from talking about age is that Trump won 67% of people who thought America's best days are in the past,
Oh, yeah.
and 72% of the people who are angry about the way things are going in this country, which was 30% of the electorate, said that best describes the way they think things are going in the country today.
Okay, so what do we think this means?
I saw a fascinating version of that poll, which is a sort of a more almost perfect inversion. So 60% of people who thought that America was better in the past voted for Trump, and 60% of people who voted for Harris thought America's best days are ahead of it. So
it's consistent.
Yeah, it seems pretty consistent.
Yeah, okay.
Although weirdly, a majority of people did think our best days or their best days are in the future. So that's hard to square. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, obviously, and we can talk more about this in the strategy section as well. But nostalgia is a huge part of Trump's pitch to voters and appeal to voters, and
Very much so.
yeah.
Also, oddly, nostalgia for the first Trump term, not just nostalgia for the raring 1980s that made him the public figure that he is, but also nostalgia for 2016.
That's when America was great, Richard. Okay, I want to put to you the details of the exit poll details of the white suburban women's strategy of the Democrats, which they spent the last 2-3 weeks trying to enact. Harris was dragging Liz Cheney all over the suburbs of America like she was a Siamese twin. Okay, so how'd the suburbs go then? They were trying to win suburban voters. The suburbs went backwards from 50% Democrat, 48% Republican to 47% Democrat, 51% Republican. That might be a reflection of the entire election, just a general swing. But yeah, they did go backwards. Loudoun County, for instance, a Washington, D.C. suburb with a very large concentration of college-educated voters. You'd think that would be right in the zone. Biden won it by 25 points. Harris won it by 17 points. In fact, the only place where she did really make ground in the suburbs was around Atlanta. I don't know why. Atlanta seems to have been the place for Kamala Harris.
I think Atlanta's changing quite a bit demographically, and that could be a part of it. I don't have details in front of me to say, but I think that, in terms of people who are moving, it's a big hub in the South, and a lot of people I think are moving there, and the demographics in that area are changing. So that could be part of it.
Okay. All right, so that's strike on the suburbs. How about the white college-educated women, which is the women in the suburbs they were trying to target? They went from, I mean, you already discussed them, Melina, but they just in terms of where they went from in 2020, they went from 54.45 to 57.41. So that's what, a 3-point move to the Democrats. Not a massive move, but, it was against the run of play for the rest of the election. So maybe that was actually a significant move in that context. And then obviously that was more than balanced out by what you described before about the college-educated non-whites who moved to the right by a significant amount. And also the result of that was that the college-educated vote in total stayed at 55% Democrat when you added the white and the non-white. They balance each other out. Right. The union households, by the way, while we're talking about college educated versus non-college educated, just a little aside, they went from Democrat 56, Republican 40 to Democrat 53, Republican 45. So there was a 3-point swing there to Republicans amongst unionists. Not a big surprise there either. But here's the interesting bit about the white suburban women's strategy, trying to peel off these Republican, white, suburban, college-educated women. The bit which I've left out so far is the Republican bit. We've got Liz Cheney. What you got for us, Liz? I tell you what she's got for us. Democrats voting Republicans went from 5% in 2020 to 4% in 2024. Republicans voting Democrats, the Liz Cheney demographic, went from 6% in 2020 to 5% in 2024. They went backwards.
Yep.
So the strategy of peeling off Republicans, I would say, was a strikeout.
This is a strategy that I have started to think of and call the decency coalition. This is where you say Trump did a coup,
Yep.
which he did.
Yes.
Something we haven't mentioned yet, but we should probably get to this.
Yeah.
Trump did a coup. He is abhorrent personally. This is, a version of what Hillary Clinton did in 2016. He's an unacceptable candidate, right? They try and do a country before party. That was the slogan to make it work. This was uncannily similar enough, in fact, to the 2016 strategy with Hillary Clinton, that I saw Harris do something in a media event that I had seen Hillary Clinton do in person at the University of New Hampshire. It was almost, a perfect copy, where she got up at this event in 2016. It was where Bernie Sanders endorsed her. And she started off talking about how she had been endorsed by a very senior US admiral. And I thought, this is a very odd person to bring up at this juncture. How many of the people here, these kind of Bernie Sanders fan college students, are like the admiral of the USS Nimitz, or whoever it was, is like the guy that I'm waiting for.
Yeah.
And at a Univision event, Harris, amongst a number of these sort of people, brought up Alberto Gonzales. Alberto Gonzales, the George W. Bush era Attorney General, who was fired in disgrace for weaponizing the Department of Justice as a deep state politicization kind of scenario. And she said, we've also got the endorsement for the Harris campaign of Alberto Gonzales. And I was thinking, who are the Alberto Gonzales stands out there who have been, first of all, even remember who he is, but are hankering to know that they've got the green light from him to go and vote for Kamala Harris. And that's when I started to think, okay, they've got sucked back into this. And it didn't work then, and it has not worked now.
Calling all Alberto Gonzales stands. If you are Peppers, reveal yourself. We want to know who you are.
Why? I'd love to know, Melina, why does the decency coalition strategy not work?
Well, I think that probably part of the reason Democrats tried it again this year is they probably feel like Biden did it in 2020 as well, and that it did work then. And so that's their prior, that they're pinning their hopes to. And I think I said this the last time I was on PEP, but I had a feeling that, a lot of Republicans voted for Biden last time in the hope that they could just move on and start a new, turn the page, as they say. And when it became apparent that things were not going to go back to normal and Reaganism versus normal Democrats, a lot had to make a decision, are they Republicans still or are they Democrats? Because you can only vote Democrat so many times before you are a Democrat. Like Liz Cheney, even though I'm sure she still identifies as a Republican and is obviously still a conservative, is not just endorsing Harris, she's endorsing Colin Allred and, other kind of, Democratic Senate candidates and House candidates. And I think for a lot of people at the end of the day, all the campaign strategy around Liz Cheney and people like that was about creating a permission structure for Republicans to vote for Democrats when they identify as Republicans. And at the end of the day, they weren't looking for permission. They didn't need permission. They were Republicans and they wanted to go home to Republicans because they tried voting Biden and were like, oh yeah, we don't like Democrats. we haven't voted for this any other time for a reason. This is not what we like. So yeah, I think that I can kind of understand the logic to why they thought it would work because to some extent it worked in 2020, but the circumstances had changed, the mood had changed, and it wasn't going to work this time.
It is something, though, that the Decency Coalition, the first time, was up against kind of hypotheticals. And this time it was up against things that Trump had really done. If you'd taken the kind of most grade 10 Trump derangement victim of kind of the 2016 era and got them to give you your worst predictions. And they'd say he's going to get rid of Roe v. Wade and do a Muslim ban and do a coup. You would have thought that was, excessive. But that happened and it seems to have made no difference at all.
Yeah, well, part of the reason I was always pretty confident that Trump was going to win was because if you looked at the polling through the year and it was like basically 50-50 all year, it suggested that for a certain enough people in the electorate, everything that had happened up until the point of this year was not enough to be disqualifying.
Yeah.
They were still considering him. And I just felt like if everything that's happened up till now is not disqualifying for you, nothing that's going to happen subsequently is going to be disqualifying either. And, for a certain, for me, it was obvious, like, even when it was Biden, I'm like, well, he's manifestly unfit. And, Harris didn't wow me, but there had been enough disqualifying things that for me, I'm like, well, he's disqualified. But it was obvious that at least enough people to win an election did not feel that way. And so I thought as soon as you don't feel that way, then you're looking at Biden and then you're looking at Harris and you're kind of judging them like a normal politician in a way that you're obviously not judging Trump as a normal politician. And if you're just judging them as a normal politician against something that you've already to some extent accepted as acceptable, then they don't look so great. And so even though it feels like, oh, how could you vote for this person over this person? It was, I think, clear from the beginning of the year that people were judging on a different scale.
I'll tell you why I think the Decency Coalition doesn't work. I think there's something that we're forgetting in this conversation, and that is the other side.
Yep.
And let me tell you, those Republicans are not forgetting the other side. It's they're from a Republican point of view, they would when they're thinking back in 2020, Joe Biden he's just a kindly old fellow, who's running because of Charlottesville and he's just hanging around in his basement, just playing gin rummy. That's what Joe Biden's doing.
Yep.
4 years later, we got a situation where, as far as they're concerned, the Democrats are trying to use lawfare to strike out the Republican candidate. They're lying about Joe Biden being compos mentis when he isn't. And then they're not even holding a primary for his replacement, and the fix is in. And they are thinking that the Democrats are just as much of a threat to democracy as Trump is.
Yeah, you can't make the claim that you're a return to normalcy if your president secretly goes senile and you hide it from everybody.
Yeah, and what I just said here is not my view. I'm just channeling what they would say if they were sitting here. And I've got some exit poll proof of this. 73% of people said democracy was threatened in this election. 73%. And the breakdown was 51% Republican, 48% Democrat. They both think that democracy is threatened. And so
They're both right.
And so I think that's the reason why the Decency Coalition wasn't going to cut it this time around, because if you're a Republican, you need some serious convincing to vote against your friends and your allies. And if it's ambiguous, you're not going to do that. You're not going to make that jump. And I think for them, it's ambiguous this year. Who's the bigger threat?
You could also see the story of Republicans, Republicans gonna Republican in the sad story of Nikki Haley, where, she won, variously 10, 20% of the vote even after she dropped out. And she clearly deluded herself into thinking that there was a Nikki Haley constituency specifically, Nikki Haley Republicans, that was a thing. And it was quite sad the way she routinely would pop up on Fox News lecturing the Trump campaign via the TV about all the ways that they needed to work really hard to get her supporters and all the things that they should be doing different to get her supporters on side, and how they couldn't take them for granted. And, if they just listen to her, then, they'll get them, but otherwise they're not going to get them and they're going to lose the election. And, I'm ready to campaign for you, Trump. Just give me the call. And for starters, the Trump campaign was right, and predictably so, that they didn't need to do anything to appeal to those voters to win them, because he could not have been personally ruder to Nikki Haley specifically. Yes. And she folded immediately in endorsing him and slavishly trying to campaign for him even when he wasn't asking her to. So the fact that he didn't have to, she didn't put up the slightest bit of resistance before turning around and supporting him, why would he assume that her voters would be any different? And he was right to assume that they wouldn't. And the other thing is that Haley and voters there obviously is still a percentage of the Republican Party that would prefer the Reaganism style of politics. But the idea that that's a meaningful constituency or enough to have any power, I think, is pretty delusional at this point. Nikki Haley, in the days before the election, did an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal endorsing Trump, as she framed it, the lesser of two evils. And her second argument for why he would be better than Harris was that he would be better for the deficit. And people who have counted up the policies on both sides, just objectively, Trump's deficits would be heaps bigger than Harris's.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it's pretty obvious that voters don't care.
Yeah.
They probably should, but regardless of whose deficit is going to be bigger or not, not only do voters in general not care, Republican voters don't care anymore. Trump has made no pretense of caring about the deficit at all and has won a lot more voters than Nikki Haley did. So I think, that proportion of the electorate, though it exists, is quite disconnected from where the action is politically in terms of who's swinging elections at the moment.
The never Trump Republicans who counted were the ones in the Senate who failed to impeach him after January 6th.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's something we really shouldn't forget, that if Mitch McConnell had some balls, Trump wouldn't even be allowed to run.
Well, Mitch McConnell, who, there was a lot of stuff uncovered during the campaign about how terrible Mitch McConnell thinks Trump is. But he made the fatal mistake of underestimating him and thinking, okay, well, he made his own kind of decency coalition mistake, but he tried to think that the American people were in it. Surely they won't allow him to have a political career after this. And guess what?
But again, it's an extension of that same logic that Nikki Haley is, trusting the American voters to be more moral than they are. And it's you're supposed to be the leaders. Why don't you? And the idea that, to the extent that their opinion matters at all, they're signaling to people with their actions that Trump is acceptable. So why would they then, by any stretch of the imagination, think that voters will behave differently? On what basis are they making that judgment if the politicians themselves, who would just like for Trump to go away, don't ever want to stand up to him?
Yeah, a vote against impeachment is a vote in the affirmative for Trump, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't then complain when other people do the same thing afterwards.
I should just say on the democracy thing, this is this is a very nerdy. This is nerdy even by PEP standards. I can't help noticing that out of the people who cited the state of democracy as the most important factor to their vote, that was actually the factor that had the highest percentage of all.
Yep.
34% said that the state of democracy was the most important reason for their vote. And they overwhelmingly went for Harris, despite what I just said before. 80% for Harris, 18% for Trump. Now, you might think that is some kind of contradiction. I actually don't, because I think that was actually a bullshit question. I think that they committed poll crimes there. And what I'm referring to is they asked, you have to name one of the following as your most important reason. And the most important reason they gave, the options they gave, their entire menu was the economy, immigration, the foreign policy, abortion, and the state of democracy. And so they're not going to tick off the two Republican ones, the economy and the illegal immigration. If they're not an abortion voter, well, they're going to say foreign policy. I actually think that the state of democracy was kind of the other box, essentially.
I mean, it's code for
Democrats.
I hate Trump, right? Like that's what they are saying when they tick that box.
Yep.
Yeah.
It would have to be, you'd have to pass it with the different types of threat to democracy to tease that out a bit more.
But having said that, I want to get on to the issue of abortion, which is another big damn issue on the exit polls. There has been some change. Interestingly, this is definitely the effects of the Dobbs effect. There's been some change in those saying abortion should be mostly legal. Back in 2020, it was 51%. In 2024, it's 65%. So that's gone up 14%, which is, I think, reflecting, that's not a surprise. It's reflecting the great salience of this issue. The main Democrat problem was, as I said before, only 14% regarded it as the most important issue. And compared to, the democracy was 34% and the economy was 31%, 11% immigration. But those who thought it was the most important voted Democrat 74% to 25%, which isn't actually as overwhelming a majority as you would hope.
Well, I was going to say, I also have a thing on who would you trust more to handle abortion.
Yes.
And Harris won, but only 49 to 45%,
Wow.
which is quite remarkable.
And when you put that together with the stat I just told you, 65% think it should be mostly legal and 49% trust Harris to deal with it, which means 16%, at least 16%, who, at the minimum, who think that it should be mostly legal, they trust Donald Trump to handle abortion more than Kamala Harris. I have no idea what's going on there.
Well, I don't find it that crazy in the sense that, I don't think Trump is personally anti-abortion. He certainly was on the record as being pro-choice in the past.
But do you trust him more than Kamala Harris on abortion?
But if you're a Republican who's pro-choice, of which there are many, and Trump has said he's not going to bring in a national abortion ban, he may not. It will depend on circumstances. But I find it quite plausible that he's not interested in doing it and he's term limited. So there's every reason to think he won't. And if you live in a state where you have abortion access or it's just not a big concern in general and you're partisan, I don't find it that surprising that you'd say, I trust Trump more. Especially if you are a Republican, you're not going to say, I trust Harris more. You're just not.
Okay. That showed me.
I'm not saying I trust him more on abortion.
That's fair enough. Richie,
It was nice that that Chaz asked you specifically, though. This is only, abortion's only an example. It happens to be related to what I'm talking about. But when we're used to looking at polls all the time, when you're trained in politics, if you've studied it, if you read about it all the time, we're used to imagining views as this kind of really, the views that are held by voters as almost this sort of box set that you get as a collection, and they're really congruent and they're really consistent with your personal beliefs. And, if you're an immigrant, you're pro-immigration and all that sort of thing. And of course, it doesn't work that way at all in real life. And the hoops that people can jump through and the carve outs that they can come up with themselves and their weird little bespoke positions are all over the place. And I'll try and put this on the Discord. One of the things which I think has changed my mind more about voter behavior than anything else I've ever read was an article written anonymously by a doctor who worked in an abortion clinic about anti-abortion campaigners coming and having abortions at his clinic. And the sort of mental permutations they have to go through. And it's extreme enough that there was a mother and daughter who used to picket a clinic. You know, he had a bunch of people write in about their own experiences. One person wrote in about a mother and daughter who picketed a clinic. The mother then brought the daughter in to have an abortion at the same clinic that they had picketed and then resumed the picket afterwards. Right? And the way that they do it is to kind of say, my abortion is special, right? Now, this is only some of the complexity in a very complex issue. I mean, one of the reasons why I think that more people are in favor of abortion is because some people are just thinking about stuff like incest exceptions and really understanding this issue, even the biology of it, possibly for the first time in some cases. But some of it is just this wacky stuff. And this wacky stuff shows up all over the place in an election like this, especially.
I definitely agree. I think that a part of the shift on abortion and why it has become more popular is the wrong word. It's got a higher favorable rating is because I do think that there is just so much more open conversation now about the kinds of circumstances in which people need abortions. And I think that, you know, you hear like the story you just told is a microcosm of it. And you hear lots of stories like this of people who are broad, you know, they're religious, they're broadly anti-abortion. They've grown up in a culture where you say, I'm pro-life. Like it's just, you don't necessarily think about all the ins and outs of why an individual might need an abortion. You just sort of think that position makes sense to me. But then when you start telling people specific stories, you know, stories about medical complications, stories about rape and incest, stories about people who are just really in dire financial or personal circumstances, people who are really young or, you know, like really old and have complicated pregnancies, all these different reasons why you might want one, then for many, many people, a degree of empathy kicks in and people say, well, I understand that. I think a lot of people have this image in their mind, particularly on the conservative side of, you know, frivolous women who use abortion as birth control. And they're against that. But when they're confronted with the realities of why many women do get abortions, suddenly that's a lot easier for them to understand and empathize with. And I think that what we're seeing now, especially since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and I think also probably just a degree of, you know, expanded media discourse and sort of like more diversity in media and probably more liberalization of media, just a more openness talking about these kind of things. Like I think on the news in the 50s, you wouldn't be having people talk in detail about these kinds of issues. And now you just see those kinds of stories everywhere that really kind of go into detail about these issues. And so I think, I mean, it's sort of heartening in a way where you see people learning about an issue and reflecting on their position just as an abstract thing. You know, it's a good thing to see. And I think that is shifting opinion, people just kind of considering the nuances of that issue in more detail.
We should just acknowledge before we move off abortion that Trump's strategy worked. Like it worked. If he's basically splitting that 50-50 with Kamala Harris on who you trust, you never would have predicted that 3 months ago. Like that actually, people are talking about the great comebacks, how him winning was the greatest comeback in American history. I think him splitting the abortion issue 50-50 was just about the greatest comeback in American history. That was genuinely impressive that he pulled that off from a political, technical point of view.
He judged correctly that he could take the evangelicals for granted.
Yep. They were a Project 25 constituency that he could just hang out to dry and they would come begging for more.
Yep. Anyway, on this strategy, low propensity voters. If we look at the new voters, people voting for the first time, obviously some of them are young people, but then some of them are just randos who pop in, pop out. They went from Democrat 64, Republican 32 in 2020 to Democrat 43, Republican 56. So they went from a 32-point Democratic advantage to a 13-point Republican advantage, a 45-point turnaround. So on one hand, you'd go, wow, that strategy worked real well. But on the other hand, the turnout of these dudes went from, because I think they're mostly dudes, went from 14% down to 8%. So there weren't many of these new voters, but those who turned out, they were Trumpists. So yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that worked for Trump.
That is not just young voters. Look, I know that it's hard to sort of patch these exit polls together, but the Amish in Pennsylvania who never vote had 180,000 register to vote, I believe.
Yeah, that's that dude, whatever his name is. That one,
Scott Pressler, the persistence.
That's it, yeah, the persistence, yeah. Who literally spent the last 4 years just registering as many Pennsylvanians as he possibly. Why he stopped in Pennsylvania? I don't know. Like it's not like they've got like a Berlin Wall around Pennsylvania. But like he might as well just go into Michigan, and if he's gonna be persistent.
Well, he persisted in Pennsylvania.
He did. Anyway, yeah, no, that is true. Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, that's a great call. That probably is just an Amish number. Anyway, the next thing is obviously the economy. Now, 31% of people thought conditions of the economy were excellent or good. They voted 91% for Democrats. Anyone who thought the economy was good, 91%. That's just a Democrat voter, right? Might be a bit of chicken and egg there. It might be Democrat voters think the economy is good. 68% thought the economy was either not so good or poor. You combine them together, they voted 70% for Republicans. Democrat, 28%. So this, to me, is a pretty definitive question in this election.
That is the election.
Yeah.
That if you're going to go one stat is why this happened, that's it, I think.
Yeah, I think so. The 68% thinking the economy was not so good or poor was obviously just too high a number for Kamala Harris to overcome. Anyway, so that to me stands out a lot. By the way, if you think that this is just like the Fox News effect, which a lot of people are talking about, saying, oh, the reason they don't like the economy is just because the media is going on about it, on and on and on and on. Not necessarily, because people seem to respond largely to personal information. When asked, compared to 4 years ago, is your family's financial situation better today? Obviously, the people who said yes vote Democrat. That's not a surprise. 82% Democrat, 14% Republican. But those who said it was about the same still went big for Democrats. 69% Democrat, 28% Republican. It was only the people who said they were worse off than 4 years ago that was landslide territory for Republicans, 81% Republicans. So, and the problem for the Democrats again is those people were 46% of the electorate. So that's your problem right there. So what that tells me is the people voting on the economy were not voting what Fox News tells them. They were voting based on their own personal pocketbook, which is hard to argue with.
Yes, although I wouldn't ascribe this to a Fox News effect, but in terms of that chicken or egg effect, people's perceptions of their own economic circumstances can also be connected to partisanship. But it's obviously more than that based on the scale of those numbers. Yeah. But I wouldn't assume that that none of it is a partisan measure, and that a lot of those people might feel a lot better about their economic circumstances today without anything meaningfully changing. But I don't think it's a Fox News effect. I think it's just people's perceptions of, it goes both ways. People's perceptions of politicians and their circumstances is a two-way street.
Fair enough.
That kind of, that vibe session effect, as people call it, is also that different types of inflation affect people's mentality very differently. The type that seems to have the worst effect on how they're feeling about the economy is inflation in grocery prices. And this is a flaw in the Liz Cheney story as well, right? Who are the people statistically who are buying groceries all the time? It's often suburban women. So that's going to be there right at the forefront of people who are feeling the day-to-day effects of inflation.
You might also say something about that age breakdown, because older people are more likely to have savings, which can actually be benefited by inflation. And maybe, some people on fixed incomes obviously will feel the pinch of grocery prices, but younger people and people on lower incomes, people with young kids and mortgages are probably much more likely to feel the effects of that. And that might also be showing up a little bit in those age demographics.
That's a good point. One more thing as a little side on the economic stuff. 52% to 46% said they trusted Trump to handle the economy more. So we were talking about how Kamala Harris was making ground for the whole 3 months on trust on the economy, and she did make ground because Biden was way below 6 points, but Trump was closer on abortion than she was on the economy.
That's not a blowout number.
No, it's
I mean,
not.
That's
No,
a
it's
sign
not.
that she did a pretty decent job in clawing that back, I think.
Absolutely. Look,
Yeah.
there were some polls a couple of weeks ago where she was ahead of Trump on trust in the economy. But obviously, different polls. But she did claw it back. I'm just saying, it once again puts into context the effort from Trump on abortion. That's all. She got close, but not quite there in the end. Another Trump strategy, which we've been talking about, is the trans ad strategy. We talked about them running on sports shows when we talked about that. I think I talked about it with you, Richie.
Yep.
In the last week of the campaign, by the way, they got worse. they started to use an out of context quote from popular black radio host Charlemagne the God. And they got
Who was a Harris supporter.
Yeah, he was a Harris supporter. And they got a black male voiceover as well to read it out. And then they're running the same ads during the sports shows. Like, it was so obvious who they were trying to target. Like, it was very, very... I'll just play the ad just so you can see what I'm talking about.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
Hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
Kamala supports transgender sex changes in jail with our money.
Kamala even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
Yeah, so anyway, that wasn't lovely. But in terms of exit polls, how did it play out? I mean, the truth is there are no exit polls about who it was targeting. But there are exit polls about sexual identity, asking if people are LGBT. LGBT went from 64-27 in 2020 to 86-13 in 2024. Probably not a big surprise that was the case. So they went from a 37-point advantage to Democrats amongst LGBTs to a 73-point advantage amongst LGBT voters. The surprise for me actually was turnout. It went from 7% to 8%. I would have expected more turnout. Like, just alone from the fact that as time goes on, there are increasing numbers of people identifying as LGBT. Alone, I would have thought would lead to more turnout than that.
I wonder whether maybe some conservative LGBT people stayed home.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it's that would make sense. But anyway, that's all I've got for you in terms of, because I was looking everywhere to see if I could find anything that could give us some indication of whether it worked or not, but there's just nothing there. They just didn't ask about it.
Yeah, I would say I wondered whether I remember you saying when you were talking about this last time that they were targeting young men by putting it on sports shows, and I thought that might be overthinking it a little bit because sports shows just in general are the most desired landscape for advertising because it's the thing that most people in general watch. I mean, obviously that, if you want to reach men as well, it's a good place to do it, but it's just also popular broadcasting in terms of things people turn on TV for.
Yeah, but that ad.
But no, sure. But the other kind of, I suppose, interesting thing off the back of it, I would be skeptical if I saw something suggesting it worked, but it said that it moved it by 2.3 percentage points or something without any link out to why, just in an article, which I was a bit sus on. Yeah. And I kind of...
Might be a study.
I would not have assumed that it did work. Honestly, it felt like a bit of a distraction to me, and I was surprised they were going so hard on it. I have found it interesting that since the election, obviously, there are a lot of people in Democratic circles having their say on what they think and we'll get into this as well, I'm sure, but why the Democrats lost and what they need to do differently. And everyone is pushing their own hobby horses immediately as a part of this. But just specifically on this issue, Seth Moulton, who I think was one of the first who came out against Biden after the debate, his main takeaway is that he has 2 young girls and he doesn't want them playing against men in sport. And as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be scared to say that. And I find it a bit unfortunate that that seems to be his primary takeaway from this election, or the first thing he wants to put out there, because even if it did help elect Trump, I do not believe for a second that it was the main thing that helped him and that Democrats got wrong. Support for trans people is so obviously more about economic issues, as we've already discussed at length. And so it seems, even if that's a bad issue for Democrats, for that to be the takeaway of the thing you're going to run with after the fact, I think is a bad lesson. They should be doing less culture war in general, not trying to wade into the culture war and just be on the other side. I find it quite puzzling.
Can I just say, by the way, on that issue, the transgender women playing a sport with cisgender women, like when you wade into these kinds of issues, it's never a great idea. But I do have a thought about this, which is that I feel like there are 2 different elements to this. One is the competitive element, like gold medals and world records, those kinds of things. When you're talking about professional athletes, and it's about livelihoods, and it's about the best of the best. That is one set of issues. Another set of issues is social sport, and sport like high school sport, and just messing around in college kind of sport. And people conflate the two, and I don't think they should, because the 2 issues are very, very different, right? But just on the second issue, which is what involves most people, recreational sport, I feel like people need to remember that what is going on with sport at the moment, I'm not just talking about with transgender people, I'm talking about with all sport, like AFL, for instance, is increasingly the most important rules are unsportsmanlike conduct and rough play. Like in AFL, every single year there are 2 more tackles that get outlawed because of rough play, right? And the same stuff's happening in rugby league as well.
Yep.
Rough play is the new catch-all rule. I don't see why that doesn't apply to transgender women playing against cisgender women. If you've got a transgender woman who is 6'2" and has thicker arms and thicker bones and all the rest of it, and they're playing volleyball and they smash the ball in someone's face, that's rough play. You get suspended for that or banned for that in the same way as you would if you weren't cisgender, if you weren't transgender. If you play like a dickhead, you get banned. Like that's how sport works. And to me, it just seems like you just apply common sense, like sensible people do with everyone else, and the same rules should apply to transgender people, and it shouldn't be a problem. Like as long as you play in the spirit of the game and you're not unduly rough, you don't have those issues. And I feel like people are forgetting that aspect of sport completely, because they're assuming that everyone's going to play like a dickhead and just push to the boundary all the time. And that's why you have referees, to stop that happening. So, Richie, you look like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, look, I think it's a complicated issue, which is about more than just the rules of recreational and refereeing of recreational sport. And it's also, Melina's right that it's a second order cultural issue. And it does seem odd that Democrats want to there's a particular component of Democrats who feel that this is a signaling issue for them. And I have a couple of theories about why that is. The first is this does seem to be something which resonates with minority voters. I'm not sure if that's polling significant, but anecdotally, I hear it from migrant communities all the time. Like Irvine, California, a very heavily Chinese area, is pretty Republican for 2 reasons. The first is tax. The second is trans issues. I think there's many such cases. The second is that I think they feel a bit burnt by it. I mean, the reason that there is ad after ad after ad for the Republicans about trans issues is that Elon Musk is paying for them, right? That Elon Musk has switched his affiliation from a Democratic voter and partisan to a Republican partisan, partly over trans issues.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is correct about Elon Musk changing his partisanship because of that, although I do have an interesting thing about that as well. But just to be accurate, he ain't the one spending the money on that ad.
Yep.
It's the Senate Leadership Fund. It's Mitch McConnell spending money on that ad. But yes.
I would say one reason, just without weighing into when you sort of talk about the difference between professional sports and amateur sports, and without sort of weighing into the particulars of the actual debate, but looking at it electorally, because they tried to run with that a bit in the last Australian federal election and it went nowhere. It didn't, no one was interested. And I do think part of the reason why it probably has more purchase in the US than Australia is that I think that line between professional and amateur sports is much blurrier in the sense that high school sports are very, there is a whole infrastructure around very competitive high school sports, obviously not for everybody, but way more than in Australia. And college scholarships for sports is a big thing. And so if you're competing, like obviously lots of people just do sports for fun and are crap at it and are just mucking around and stuff. But I think for a much more significant portion of the population than Australia, sports is very intense. The stakes are higher. In terms of those competitions, if you're quite good, if you're talented at a sport in high school, you have an incentive to work really hard at it, because maybe even if you're not going to be professional, you might be good enough to get a college scholarship, and college is expensive. So that's worth something. And so I can see how it's a bigger debate there and it gets more traction with people there than here. But I still would be surprised if it was the issue to the extent that that's what Democrats should be taking away from this election.
Totally agree. By the way, just because I'm curious about this issue as well, I know we got actually quite a few transgender peppers, who comment a bit, like Frolicking Nerd. I know you play sport. If tell me what you think of what I was just saying before, just because I'm just curious. I've been thinking about it myself for a little while. Does it make sense to you? Does it not? As someone who actually plays sport, because I am going to be doing correspondence again from next week. The election's over. Correspondence will be back. One more thing about polling I've got before we move on to the next section, unless you have more, Melina. The Puerto Rico thing, the floating island of garbage. How did that go down?
Apparently, Puerto Ricans love being called garbage.
Apparently they do. Osceola County, roughly 1 in 3 residents is Puerto Rican. It's the largest concentration of Puerto Ricans outside Puerto Rico. And Hillary won it by 25 points. Biden won it by 14 points. Trump won it by 2 points. so there you go. So that's a bit of fun as well. Do you have anything to add in this section, Melina, before we move on?
It's almost like, people describe Trump as an insult comic. And if you go and see an insult comic and he insults you, it's almost kind of fun because you're part of the show. Is that what's happening here? I don't know. The one thing I was going to add on exit polling that I found interesting, and maybe this will also lead us into campaign hindsight, because one thing that I felt and we discussed was the idea that whoever won the late breaking voters was going to win the election.
Yes.
And it had looked, and part of this, I know this is part of why you changed your prediction at the last minute.
It was.
Keep reminding you of that.
Yes, thank you.
Was because it had appeared from some polling like late breaking voters were going for Harris. And that did give me pause as well, when I was looking at it. But this, in the NBC exit polling, they asked the question, when did you finally decide who to vote for in the presidential election? And showed the breakdown of who voted for who. 79% of people had decided who to vote for before September. So that speaks to the idea that the result was, that's obviously still a lot of voters on the table, but a lot of votes were baked in very early. Trump did win people who decided in the last week. So the people who decided in the last few days, which was 4% of the electorate, 47% Trump, 41% Harris. And there's a sizable middle gap for, I suppose, third parties. And people who decided in the last week, which was 3% of the electorate, 54% went for Trump and 42% went for Harris.
There you go.
It gets kind of more skewed towards Harris. There was a period where people were going to Harris well, obviously in that period where she was getting momentum, she won more voters in that period, but the late breakers who went in the end for Trump. So
Only I'd known that the day of the election.
Before we make too much fun of Chaz for being dumber than Fev, we should say that he had at that point had less sleep than almost any other human being in the world.
This is fair.
That is true,
yeah.
but I still got to cop it. Got to cop it. It's fair enough. All right, so we next had sort of two sections that were kind of the same section, which were how did this happen and potentially reevaluating the campaigns in hindsight. They're kind of the same thing. So either one of you, why don't we start with you, Richie, because Melina's talked a little bit here and I've talked a little bit. What are your feelings of how this happened and any particular reevaluation of the campaign now you've seen how it ended?
I mean, I think it's predominantly economic. Harris had, for me, there's a phenomenon related to the glass ceiling called the glass cliff, where women are sometimes given leadership positions when something's about to go terribly wrong. I mean, I think it's a fluke that Harris wound up in this situation, but this is kind of a glass cliff election. It was going to be extraordinarily difficult for anyone to take over from Biden last minute. She certainly did a lot better job than he would have done. I mean, if you saw some of the rare appearances that Biden made towards the end of the campaign, he was just completely cooked. There was no way that he was going to be even able to physically complete the campaign.
He was literally doing about an hour of work a day, if that.
Yeah.
Probably half an hour every third day, and he was still screwing up probably 1 hour every 2 times.
I think that, when they wheeled Jimmy Carter, the 100-year-old Jimmy Carter out of his palliative care home to look at the sun, he kind of looked in better shape than Joe Biden did. So very, very difficult situation. And for someone who had failed to even really have a good showing in a Democratic primary. So one really, really impressive achievement for Harris, which is kind of a little aberrational, in fact, it's so impressive, is that she defeated Donald Trump in a debate so badly that he refused to debate her again. I mean, Donald Trump has destroyed multiple professional politicians' careers in debate appearances. And Harris is one of the only people who worked out how to successfully trip him up.
It's true.
The fact that Harris kind of disappeared for the rest of the campaign, I thought these tactical mistakes probably made no difference, but I thought that was a tactical mistake. She also started off on a much harder sort of populist economic line of bashing business people. And I have heard that she was told by a family, I haven't heard, I read that she was told by a family member, her brother-in-law, I believe, who's a senior executive at Uber, that this campaigning style was hurting her chances of getting endorsements from people like Mark Cuban. And she decided to...
What a loss.
Yes, she decided to wind that back. Mark Cuban did come on board, and that didn't make too much difference. So I felt that was a sign that we were kind of back in Hillary Clinton territory of, if we can just get these establishment figures to say it's all a big no-no, well, that was the big no-no. There's a lot of just so stories. You said before, you can't sort of go and push your own barrow. People tend to say, oh, they voted for all the reasons that I think are important. Yeah. So I was right all along. I mean, it's just a coincidence that we were right all along. I mean, you weren't. But so yeah, if you look at two people, I'm just going to talk about very, very quickly. Yeah. So Bernie Sanders. Yeah. And Matt Iglesias. Yeah. And they had these kind of, one was economic and one was cultural. Bernie Sanders said, it's no surprise that that Democrats lost again. They've left working people behind and had this roll call of economic stuff that they should do. Matt Iglesias had this roll call of cultural stuff they should do, except there are biological differences in gender, except that, bad people should go to jail. I can't remember the specifics. Kamala Harris kind of did both of those things. She did have, Biden had a very progressive economic record pro-labor, probably one of the most progressive economic presidents since FDR, seemed to make very little difference. And Harris did really soft pedal stuff like trans issues to the point that the trans community got a bit mad at her. Neither of those things made any difference. So I think that those sort of postmortems are not very useful. I do think that there are probably wider cultural issues, especially around young men, that don't make cultural liberalism particularly attractive to them. I think it doesn't really have a strong offer for them, especially at a kind of like the things that they watch, their interests, which you're starting to see bleed through in this election. But I can't really see a strategy that was going to take anyone in Harris's position to the White House again. The winning Democratic strategy had to start in 2020 with a succession plan for Joe Biden. Yeah. And the moment they didn't have one, they were gone. It really didn't matter what else was in place.
Okay. All right. So you're seeing the age factor with Joe Biden as a critical factor then? Like as in like some would argue that it was the economy that was the main issue here, but you're saying no, it was the fact that they didn't have a proper succession plan and the whole age issue.
Well, I think it's a fatal combination of the two.
Yeah.
That, to put it this way, with an economy this bad, you in inflation terms for an incumbent, I'll put those two caveats on. You would need an incredible offer of other kinds to compensate for it. An offer which seemingly no incumbent in the world has been able to come up with. But they were not able to have really any compelling offer because they didn't have anyone available to make it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like real Hail Mary play stuff, but if that's the macroeconomic conditions that the election's taking place in, that's kind of all you've got. I also think we're playing double hypotheticals now, but I also think if the economy had been strong and hadn't had that sort of inflation, I still think they would have lost this election because of what happened to Joe Biden.
Melina, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the only hypothetical in terms of what they could have done differently to win the election that feels plausible to me is if Biden had decided in 2023 that he wasn't running again and they had a competitive primary to pick his replacement. One of the arguments I've seen in favor of primaries in recent days is that it gives candidates not just an opportunity to get tested as candidates, but also to kind of demonstrate that they are aligned with the mood of the electorate and that they've kind of, you've picked the right person to match the mood of the electorate. So not only would they have been able to get a better candidate than Joe Biden and probably Kamala Harris, who I think did do a good job in the campaign, but hasn't demonstrated that she has a broad constituency. It would have been a chance to identify the Democrat best place to speak to these times. A quick thing on Bernie Sanders, because I saw his statement and, he is also one of the many people who's come out and, which is natural, but, try to kind of make the postmortem about pushing their personal ideas and agendas, which is obviously everyone's going to do. But, his statement was broadly saying Democrats need, that they've lost working class voters and all of their efforts need to be around getting working class voters back. And I agree. I think it's a huge problem that Democrats have let working class voters go. They've lost their ability to talk to them to the extent that they used to before. And that's why they're losing elections. And that is key to getting them back. But that idea alone, everyone's thinking that. The question is how.
Yep.
The question is, what are you going to do to appeal to them? And it doesn't follow logically that Bernie Sanders' program is definitely the way to do that.
Yep.
Bernie won working class voters over Hillary, but Hillary won them over Obama and Biden won them over Bernie in 2020. So the idea that there is a cohesive, and Trump obviously is ideologically worlds apart from Bernie. And so you have to reconcile the fact that people are appealing to this group with very different ideas. And you need to actually make the case that your ideas are going to appeal to them. Because a huge part of Trump's appeal, and always has been, is I am a billionaire, I am a very rich man, and now I'm going to help you become rich too. And there are many aspirational working class voters in the country who hear that and like the sound of it very much.
Yep.
And just as one example, this is less economic, but over the course of the election campaign, I heard many, podcasts and news articles that were interviewing random voters around the country. What do you think? What are you hearing? Like, what's your opinion on the campaigns, blah, blah, blah. And there was one that was really interesting to me where they talked to a Hispanic man, I forget which state he was in, but in a swing state. And he'd gotten a call from the Democratic campaign, and their pitch to him was basically, we cannot let a convicted felon back in the White House. And his reaction was, I am a convicted felon. And not only are you talking to me like I'm a bad person, which I don't think, but he's like, Trump gives me hope that maybe I could run for mayor one day. Yeah. And I thought that's remarkable because, in a country like America, lots of people go to jail. they jail a lot of people in America. And so even just that idea that, it speaks to the idea that many people did not find him disqualifying in a way that Democrats thought he was obvious, but also that Trump does, even though Trump, is not a self-made man, that gets brushed over. People look at him as very wealthy, very successful, and that appeals to people. And so, I'm not trying to trash Bernie Sanders and saying that none of his ideas appeal to working class people. Obviously, he has a lot of ideas that have shown appeal, but it's very easy to say, oh, we need to appeal to working class voters. The hard part is figuring out how, and that is not obvious, and it's not easy to figure out how to do that.
Unfortunately, what appeals to them is Donald Trump. I had exactly the same thought as you about the convicted felon stuff, and went and looked up the proportion of Americans that have a criminal record. And it is roughly the same proportion of the population that has a college degree.
Wow.
Yeah, so it is a lot. As you say, a lot of Americans go to jail. A lot of Americans have criminal records. So that's a big factor in why the convicted felon stuff didn't land.
Yeah, I was just going to say with the Bernie Sanders, I go back to Missouri with the Bernie Sanders policies. Like they just take the policies and they vote for Josh Hawley. Like I'm not saying that working class people don't appreciate working class policies, but it remains to be seen that they vote for them. Like and I think what you said before about being able to talk to working class people, I think is important, which is one of the reasons why I'm about to ask you about Tim Walz, because people are starting to bash him already. There's a bad pick. I don't regret the pick of Tim Walz at all. And I think the Democrats need to do more picking of normal people.
This is, we often have to catch ourselves, I think, in such unusual times from forgetting about just really bog standard dynamics in US politics. And one of them is, let's time machine back to the year 2007 and imagine someone saying to you, I think that the best Democratic presidential candidate should be a California senator who is not a dazzling media performer. That is not historically the kind of person who has become the kind of Democrat who has become, it used to be almost a cliche that you should pick a southern governor if you wanted to have a Democratic president. So that sort of normal person test is being failed in that way.
Absolutely. I was going to, sorry, just quickly on the working class policies thing, just to pick up on what you said, Richie, before. I think people underestimate just how left-wing Joe Biden was economically.
Yep,
like
they sure do.
He was super, super progressive. Like the Joe Biden of more than 6 months before he was president would have just been rolling over in his about-to-be grave on the stuff that he did when he was president, because like it was just so much more left-wing than anything Joe Biden talked about up to 2019. It's it was very, in fact, I actually think that there's an interesting situation developing here, where the Democrats have been having this little internal wonk war for decades now over the battle, over some of them, the more centrist Democrat economist types, are all about avoiding inflation.
Yeah.
And the more left-wing types are all about avoiding unemployment. Right? And Obama was very much in the former category, which is why the stimulus for after the GFC, this massive GFC, was less than $1 trillion. It was like $787 billion off the top of my head. It was nothing compared to the stimuluses afterwards, because Obama was hell-bent he had Larry Summers there, and he had all those dudes, and the Tim Geithner, and they were just desperate to avoid inflation at all costs. And they did avoid inflation. And it took 7 years to get the recovery going. They crawled along, just slowly reducing unemployment because they were painstakingly trying to avoid inflation.
And they got reelected.
Re-elected. Exactly is where I'm going. And they got re-elected. And then Biden came along. You had COVID. And he said, we're not going to do that this time. We're going to actually help people, and we'll get the recovery going fast. Bang, here we go, $3 trillion. Let's go. And it would have been bigger if Manchin hadn't been around. And the net result of that was, I mean, like different people, different economists say different things, but it seems to me that somewhere between 5 and 7% of the inflation was from supply chain crunches from the GFC, and somewhere between 2 and 4% was because of the stimulus. Like and even though that inflation was going to happen anyway, 5 to 6% is still a lot of inflation. It was going to happen anyway. The lesson, I'm telling you now, the lesson that the wonk side, the wonk team on the Democrats, the next time it's President Shapiro or something like that, they're going to, and there's a recession, and go, don't chuck a Biden. And what's going to happen is the lesson they will have learnt will have been to be less progressive.
Yep.
That's the lesson of this election to the wonk team in 8 years' time or whatever the next recession is. And they're going to do Obama Mark II, another creepy crawly kind of recovery. So, but I mean, I understand where B's coming from, and I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying that I just know that the next team is going to learn the opposite lesson.
The wonk war has been won by the inflation hawks. Yeah. And when you look at the what Melina was talking about before with the perception of pocketbook perception, something which really feeds into that is it's not just people going, these groceries are suddenly much more expensive. The before times were also a time when the government was giving them free money to pay for those groceries.
Yeah.
So that is a really sharp turnaround in perception in a relatively short space of time.
Okay, I brought up with Tim Walls. Let me throw it to you guys, because there are people right now, because the knives are out, and there are people right now who are arguing that Tim Walls was a terrible pick, and if only they'd picked Josh Shapiro, then Kamala Harris would have won Pennsylvania, and she would have still lost by an enormous amount. But anyway, let's leave that aside. What are your views on the idea of Tim Walls being a terrible mistake in hindsight?
The French philosopher René Girard says that scapegoating is one of the fundamental human activities.
Did he really say that?
Yeah.
Well, you carry that around your head. Okay, fair enough.
We didn't say it word for word, and he was writing it in French. Any post-election loss, you look for scapegoats, and you look for scapegoats who aren't too big, powerful, or important, and people just get weirdly super mad at Tim Walls.
Yeah, I don't feel like it made any difference. I feel like in general, this feels like the nothing mattered election, and I don't mean that in like the cynical or despairing sense. I mean it in the sense that it does feel like the result was baked in really early. And you can see because all these crazy things happened, and the only two things that meaningfully shifted the race, Joe Biden's debate obviously shifted it from close to historic blowout, and Kamala Harris coming in for him instead shifted it back to relatively close in the polls. And then that was pretty much it. And like a lot of things happened in this election, and you just never got the sense that that any of it was meaningfully changing. And like you could almost feel it in that like panicked reaction to the Puerto Rican things of like maybe it's this that's going to change things, and it didn't at all.
The attempted assassination didn't change anything.
I was about to say,
exactly.
But maybe the Puerto Rican joke.
2 attempted assassinations.
We don't have a lot of polling data or priors on this, but apparently you don't get an assassination survival bump. I mean, Trump must feel a little bit ripped off that fist bump photo doesn't seem to have really moved the needle a whole lot.
No.
I do have like a couple of things I think that Trump did right that I want to talk about, but I feel like you have some things you want to say about Tim Walz. So
yeah, I'll just say a couple of things
you
about
say
Tim
that
Walz,
first.
and then you jump in after that.
I have nothing to say about Tim Walz.
That's fair enough. Okay, look, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, except to say that just to repeat what we said originally, which was Shapiro had his own baggage. Like the Alan Greenberg murder thing would have been a very ugly. Like for those who don't remember, someone who Josh Shapiro, as Attorney General, declares a suicide was very obviously a murder, a very, very grisly murder, and Republicans were really into that. And if he'd been the vice presidential nominee, we would have heard all about that murder for 4 months. So he had his own issues. And also, I still think to this day that Kamala, that he was a bit too ambitious to be a vice president. And I think that was a good call in that respect. But also, I like we just said, it wouldn't have won the election anyway.
People are talking, I mean, if she'd picked Shapiro and they lost, it would have been all the more people talking about Democrats losing the working class and saying like, oh, you picked another elite lawyer, you know, Ivy League educated. Like that would be the narrative after the fact.
Absolutely. Absolutely would. And just very quickly, that obviously the strategy they were running from right at the beginning is for Kamala Harris to shrink into a tiny little ball and be nothing. And when she says anything, it needs to be center. Go to the center over and over again. They needed at some point in time to throw the left a bone of some kind. That's what Tim Walz was. He was the bone. If they'd picked Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly as the vice president, they would have needed to have some super left-wing policy, something somewhere to throw to the left. And so it made sense to have, like, Tim Walz was the most popular contender for the left at that point in time. So that made perfect sense. So I think from a tactical point of view, that made sense. By the way, I'm not some massive Tim Walz stan. Right? I can understand what they're saying. The other thing is, I do continue to think, I don't think it's cost them the election, but I continue to think he was totally wasted the entire election. In that, I've said this a number of times, I'll say it one more time, the reason they picked him was partly because he was so good in interviews. Like he did a whole bunch of interviews on MSNBC, was very personable, very friendly, very relatable, and then they never got him to do that again. Like when they actually picked him, they buttoned him down, they gave him his talking points, they tried to turn him into Kamala Harris. He's not Kamala Harris. That's why he had the bug eyes and he was all nervous and sweating and looking like Elmer Fudd. It was because that he wasn't in his natural environment. They need to just let him be Tim Walz. You're picking a gregarious dude who likes to chat. He's the guy who goes to Joe Rogan. He's the guy to send out on the suicide missions and just let him be friendly. He should turn up at Fox News. That's what they should have done with him. And they just didn't. They just put him in cotton wool for some reason. I know he spent some time in rural areas, in areas where there aren't cameras. Fine. But they should have used his ability on TV. They never used it. And when he was on TV, they buttoned him down. And I think that was a terrible mistake. Not that it cost them, but I think it was a mistake.
Yeah, the messaging didn't really seem to play to either of their strengths, sort of the situations that they were put in. I mean, I don't know that going on Rogan would have made any difference. And it is a situation where Harris has tended to get a little bit tongue-tied when she does go on podcasts and things like that.
That's what I'm thinking Walz does.
Well, yeah, Walz, I
bet that would have gone along great, Rogan and Walz.
Put Harris in some version of a debate and put Walz in the podcasts, and they both did it at the beginning and then never again. That seems strange.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay, Melina, jump in.
About Trump?
What about whoever you want to jump in about?
Yeah, I would, just one thing on Walz. When you say they made him like Kamala Harris, I think that's true in the sense that like it's kind of the VP syndrome. People who get in that position, which obviously someone as ambitious as JD Vance is not burdened by, but people who want to please the boss, they get really afraid to say the wrong thing and then they can't say anything anymore. And that's what happened to Harris all through the Biden administration. She was terrible in interviews because she clearly didn't want to say the wrong thing. So she just didn't say anything. And I think that's what happened to Walz too, because he seemed really scared and unprepared for the moment anytime he was in the national spotlight. But he is good in media. That was his reputation. That's why he was picked. So it did seem like there was a fear about meeting the moment, and maybe that was coming from him as well. Maybe they sensed that. Maybe he reacted that way because they were putting so many rules on him and that was hard. But yeah, it does seem like they could have utilized him better, or he could have done better. But yeah, I'm keen to talk about a few things that I think the Trump campaign did well.
Yeah.
Because they did win. And I mean, these are just a couple of small things, but that stood out to me. One is that he had a more competent campaign this time around. And there were early signs of that. Like the first sign for me where I really started paying attention to him again and thinking, oh no, this is happening again, was back in April last year. DeSantis was riding high. Everyone thought that he was going to be, the future of the party. Trump was kind of at a low point. And DeSantis's whole theory of the case was, I'm Trump, but competent. That's his whole argument. And DeSantis goes to Washington to try and get the Florida congressional Republicans on side endorsing him. And he gets there only to find that every one of them has already decided to endorse Trump. And they all start coming out at that time and endorsing Trump, just like dunking on DeSantis. And it was significant not just because he hadn't gotten their endorsement, but that he had been out-organized by the Trump campaign. And that was an early sign to me that the Trump campaign had gotten more professional and more serious, and that they were on the right track. And it seems like a lot of that was Susie Wiles, who's just been announced today, I think, as his chief of staff. I read an interesting profile on her today, and she has a long history in Florida politics, and she worked for the Trump campaign in 2016 and 2020 in Florida. She worked for DeSantis's gubernatorial campaign. She was going to work in his administration, and then they dumped her very unceremoniously, and then she turned around and destroyed him using all of her insider knowledge to help Trump defeat him. Pretty sure the pudding fingers thing came from her. That was the heavy subtext in this article. But more to the point, like, it just was an early sign that Trump's organization had gotten better than previous cycles, and that he had done an end run around the person whose whole theory of the case was that he was the competent one, and that proved not to be true. So I think they did have a good campaign. Like, obviously Trump himself is very ill-disciplined in a way that, has swings and roundabouts with the electorate, but the actual mechanics of it were pretty good. Yep. Another little thing I heard this referenced in at least 3, those kind of interviews with random punters that you hear through all the stories. I heard this come up at least 3 times in totally unrelated stories, but I don't think I ever heard anyone point to it as a significant factor in a kind of a macro sense. But it kind of popped up enough times that I'm like, I think this was a thing. Trump's signatures on the stimulus checks during COVID. I think it worked.
Yep.
It seemed really dumb to me at the time, like just classic Trump, arrogant stupidity. I heard 3 random voters in different stories mention the Trump stimulus checks as being important to them, that they had got those checks from Trump and that those checks had made a difference, and they credited him for that. And there was an interesting article about Bidenomics and saying, talking about how Biden done a bad job of selling it, even though good things had come out of it. I'll just read a quote from that. And part of it is referencing the first interview that Biden had done after dropping out. It said, this is Biden. One of the problems is we knew all the things we did were going to take a little time to work their way through. So now people are realizing, that highway, he trailed off for a moment and then recovered. The biggest mistake we made, didn't put up signs saying Joe did it. And this is the article. He ended this with a bit of chuckle. Biden isn't wrong. Objectively and improbably, he has passed more new domestic programs than any Democratic president since Lyndon Johnson, maybe even since Franklin Roosevelt. So that's Joe Biden recognizing I didn't do the bragging thing of putting my name and face all over these achievements, and I got no credit. Trump put his name on those stimulus checks, and people remember it now still. And it's part of, we talk about people having nostalgia for the Trump administration. You think, was it so good? What are people thinking about when they think about that? I think those stimulus checks is part of it. Obviously not all of it, but I think it made a meaningful difference. And the other thing that I think, it's a little bit comical, but I noticed, I'm sure I use this a lot, but in his big rally at Madison Square Garden, there's these big banners on the wall saying Trump will fix it. And it's just so, it obviously is a a lot of magical thinking in that. But Trump promised easy solutions to complex problems. And you can like be, derisive about that and say, it's magic beans and it's stupid and people are stupid for believing it or whatever. But Harris promised piecemeal solutions or no solutions to complex problems. And like, you can kind of understand people given the choice between Trump will fix it and either not saying anything about a problem or, here's like a micro-targeted policy for one specific problem in the world that may or may not be for you because it's going to be means tested and for a particular demographic or age or whatever, that it's more appealing. Like, I mean, it does remind me a little bit of that episode of The Simpsons where Homer runs for sanitation commissioner and it's can't someone else do it and everything is going to be magically solved. But that was a successful campaign too, so there's something in it.
Someone, was it Jane Coateson or someone like that, said it's a grade 6 president, no homework and pizza for everyone campaign. Yeah.
Coke in the bubblers.
Yeah.
Let me throw another, while we're talking about these reevaluations and what went wrong, what went right. Another theory that a lot of people have been throwing around in the last 2 or 3 days is that, in fact, I heard someone throwing it around today on Planet America, that is all about racism and misogyny. That's what this is all about. Kamala Harris is the second woman to not get the gong after Hillary Clinton. The map is almost identical. The numbers are almost identical, also against Trump. I don't see a lot of evidence for that in the exit polls, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means they didn't ask about that. There are no shortage of female governors out there.
Yep.
Not so many black governors out there, admittedly. There's, I think, 4 in history there's been. But remember that uniform swing across America. And I remember, I didn't read you out before the list of the cities. These are the swings. Since 2020, Manhattan shifted 9 points. Brooklyn shifted 12. Queens shifted 21. The Bronx shifted 22. New York State went from D plus 23 to D plus 12. New Jersey went from 16 Democratic advantage to 6. New Jersey. Illinois went from 18 Democratic advantage to 5. Illinois. All of those are closer than Florida, by the way, now. Florida is plus 13. California. Kamala Harris's home state went from 29 plus Democrat to 17 plus Democrat. 12-point swing in California. Still counting, though. Houston shifted 8 points. San Antonio shifted 8 points. Dallas shifted 10 points. Philadelphia shifted 5 points. Detroit shifted 9 points. Chicago shifted 11 points. That's when I stopped taking count. That was enough. There's a swing everywhere. If there was sexism and misogyny and racism, wouldn't it be unevenly distributed across America? Maybe it wouldn't. But that is the kind of thing which I'm thinking about. But then I read a correspondence, which I want to read you guys. Hey! This is the only correspondence for today. I wasn't going to do it, but I really love this one. And so I just wanted to share it. And today was the perfect day. Melissa wrote this. I do take exception to a point Chaz made about Kamala in relation to her extreme caution during interviews. Honestly, that kind of thought appears to come from a fairly privileged male perspective of traditional male presidential candidates in standard campaigns. I'd argue that it's worth considering why she is so cautious. As a female candidate, she's incredibly aware of the stakes and the sense of longing coming from many, including around the world, who think a female American president is long overdue. Hillary dealt with this also, but it's worth bearing in mind how much extra scrutiny as well as judgment Kamala receives compared to Trump. When Kamala was announced a few months ago as a new candidate, there were whispers in America and around the world to the effect of, But is America ready for a black South Asian woman as a president? The Republican wolves are baying for blood and ready to pounce at absolutely any tiny faux pas or slip up from her. And she knows they will amplify the howls of, see, she can't possibly cut it as a president, to the point where those claims will saturate the media for days on end. I think Kamala is rightly extremely cautious at this point, because this was a week ago, by the way, at this point, because it really only takes one decent faux pas for her to lose the faith of many. And in the time-compressed campaign she's found herself in, she literally has no time to correct or smooth them over, which she otherwise would have in a standard campaign. Criticising Kamala's speech as cautious word salad when it's really pretty standard political speak, as opposed to Trump's extraordinary incoherence, doesn't give Kamala enough credit for tightly holding everything together and being risk-averse under pretty extreme conditions and immense pressure. Well, why I'm reading that is to then ask you, well, number one, do you think at a top line level, misogyny and racism is a problem in this race? And if it's not at a top line level, is it a problem in setting unequal expectations for Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump?
I said I think last time that I was here that I think it's not impossible for women and people of color, obviously, because it's happened, to win the presidency, but they need to be pretty much perfect. Because I do think that there is a higher standard of judgment, and also there's often you have to contend with people finding it harder to imagine you in that role because it hasn't happened before. And like, I did hear interviews with people saying, they're not comfortable with the idea of a woman as president. So it's not most people, but there's definitely people out there. You raise the issue of there being women governors. Well, there's 50 places where you can be governor in America and only one where you can be president. So, when you have a greater odd of succeeding across the board there, and, some states are much more liberal than others, or some, you could just are very conservative, and, if you're a very conservative woman, you can sort of cut through in a certain way. But so I think you see the same thing in Australia. We've obviously had a female prime minister, but we've had female leaders be more successful at the state level and with less sort of scrutiny and intensity of backlash than we saw at the federal level. So I think that is a thing. If you look at someone like Obama, when I say you need to be perfect, obviously I'm not saying I think he's a perfect person or that he was a perfect president. But I mean, what I mean is, like, someone like him, he was incredibly charismatic. He was it was a very unusually talented politician. He had no scandals of significance in his background. He'd kind of been around just long enough in politics that you could take him seriously as a politician, but not long enough to have gotten a record that you could pin things on him. Like, his main point of difference with Hillary in the primary was that he'd been anti the Iraq War and she'd been pro it. But honestly, I mean, this is conjecture, but he wasn't in the Senate when Hillary voted for the Iraq War. Obama is an ambitious man, and everyone voted for that war who was in the Senate. If he was in the Senate at that time, I'm pretty sure he would have voted for it too. Good for him that he wasn't, and that he, was in. I'm sure it still would have been hard to speak out, but less hard to say this is a dumb war versus having a vote on the record. And so, the timing and circumstances was good for him in that respect as well. But there was just, people tried to pin things on him, but there was really, like, he was quite exceptional for, just amongst all his competitors politically. And so I think there's going to be some woman at some point who is the female version of that. But that's what it's going to take, I think, because there are lots of structural reasons why it's hard. There are people who are sexist, not just conservatives. There are sexist left-wing people too. You are dealing, particularly at the moment, where there is a lot of cultural backlash among not all men, but certain proportions of men at the perceived advancements that have happened for women in recent times. I mean, it feels overblown to me in the sense that, men are still dominating in all the areas that count. Like, yes, women are more likely to go to uni, but if they're not more likely to get paid better and be executives and all those kinds of things at the end of it, then you just have more college debt. You're not actually doing better for yourself, but whatever. I think that one of the kind of dynamics that I've just observed in my life, and I will give a anonymized anecdote to illustrate it, was there was a time once I was working on a show a long time ago, and I was working on a comedy show as a writer, and a male friend of mine who was a left-wing person, hearing that I was working on this show, complained to me that he had a male friend who had been up for a writing job on that show, but allegedly didn't get it because they had to hire a woman. On this show, in that writer's room, there were 9 men and 3 women. So I would argue, if you're not the 9th best man, don't blame the 3rd best woman for taking your job. But like, this is someone who would not think of himself as a sexist at all. Like, would think of himself as a progressive person. And that's just like an underlying attitude that he's not even questioning. But, you know, if you're a woman in the world, you kind of see things like that and you're like, oh, okay, that's how people think about us. So, you know, I think that the level of sexism that exists in society is still huge, and the barriers that women face in their day-to-day lives, obviously not as bad as they used to be, in many ways are more subtle than they used to be, which is a sign of it being, like, I don't think that's worse. I think things are better, but when it is more subtle, it's kind of can be harder to combat because people will deny it even exists, but, you know, you certainly feel it. And so I think, you know, like for me personally, just looking at my experience in the world, I can't deny that there's sexism that is making it harder for a woman to be president than not. I don't think it's impossible. I do think it will happen one day, but I do think it will take an exceptional person who is kind of basically beyond reproach, because, I mean, look at everything Trump gets away with, like, you know, but not even just Trump, like, you know, just people like, you know, JD Vance screwed up a million times. No one cares. You know, I do think that things stick more easily to women and minorities. And so it is something you have to contend with. And I can see why that makes her very cautious. That's probably partly Kamala Harris's personality as well. But I'm sure but, you know, personality is also formed by your lived experiences over 60 years. So, yeah.
Richie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think anytime we're talking about sexism and racism with Trump, let's look at the inverse of the argument. Is it really, do you really think that, you know, grab them by the pussy Trump, the Trump who became a political figure by denying that the first black president was a citizen of the United States, that his rise has nothing to do with sexism and racism? Of course it does. They're always in the room with him. What complicates this picture is when that becomes a kind of catch-all or headline level indictment, which doesn't get into the complexities of how these behaviors operate in the real world. Arguably, you know, stuff like intersectionality gives much more subtle pictures of the relationship between these kinds of things, which just flat out good old-fashioned liberal condemnation doesn't catch very well. So, yeah, I mean, it's important, I think, to qualify the racial appeals that Trump makes by looking at the fact that they are nativist, for example. That's a very subtle distinction, but it's a really, really important one, where he can just, you know, write off Haitians at the same time as extolling the virtues of African Americans. And that makes sense to Trump supporters, including African American Trump supporters. That stuff really counts, I think. Melina has said everything, or a lot of what needs to be said about sexism, so I won't add much to that. I'll just say one thing in the American context. A driver of sexism around the presidency, which you don't see with governors, is that the president is the commander-in-chief, right? He's expected to, that's a phrase you hear in the United States all the time. He is widely understood to be the head of the military in a way that, you know, it would be weird to think about like John Howard being in Australia. The president is expected to demonstrate kind of martial valor and virtue in a way that stereotypically I think it would be difficult for a woman to do in the same way.
And that's why Harris and Clinton wheel out these generals and say, look, he thinks I'm good.
Yeah.
Because they are up against a real skepticism about the idea of women controlling the military. And so they're trying to allay those concerns. But I don't think that that those things are effective. But that is the motivation behind doing that.
I should say, by the way, I think that well, both Hillary and Kamala Harris did this pretty well. But I think particularly Kamala Harris, when she turns on severe mode, like, I think she's got gravitas. I think she's got like during her convention speech when she just went into commander in chief mode. Like, I thought she pulled it off, and I didn't hear too many people suggesting otherwise. But I take the points you made. They were very, very well made. I get the feeling this is something that probably you've thought once or twice about before. The points roll off the tongue quite nicely. I just wanted to on this note about the risk averse and the situation she was in. There's one area where I just reckon. There's one area where I totally see the issue. And there's one where I don't see the issue, where I just think they should have just done it. Not that I think either of these cost them, because I just keep on coming back to this point we're all making over and over again, which is this was a tough one to win. The one where I feel a bit of sympathy is I do totally acknowledge the point that Melissa was making, and which you backed up in a slightly different way. But I just know that the way Trump acts with people, one of his key mechanisms is, and I think people sometimes don't come to grips with this. They go, oh, he lies so much. He's always lying. I think there is a difference between honesty and authenticity. And I think that Trump is extremely dishonest, but authentic. Like, you're never left in any doubt what he actually thinks. He's very open about that. When he's acting like a nutcase, you go, well, that's him. Like, he's not putting that on. That's him. And because of that, and he knows that his weakness is his lack of honesty, and his strength is his authenticity, which most politicians are not. And so he loves to accuse his opponent of being inauthentic. He does it every time. That's his go-to. And if you look at this election, he just didn't shut up about it. There was one form of phony after another with Kamala Harris. First, it was her race. She just decided she was black. Like, that was him trying to call into question her authenticity, not her race. Then it was her accent. Oh, she's putting on an accent. She's putting on an accent now for Detroit, and that's the next thing. Then there was the McDonald's thing. That was another one. Oh yeah, she's a phony. She never went to McDonald's. Like, every single one of these on their own seems stupid, but when you step back and think about it, you go, okay, what he's doing is he's trying to call into question her authenticity here, and that's how he's trying to get an advantage. And the problem is that she can't, when she's obviously not going to do the loosey-goosey thing that he does with hyperbole and stuff. She obviously can't do that. But she wouldn't get away with it. That's part of the sexism. Although I think he's special. I think a lot of males wouldn't be able to do that either. Because she has been so cautious and guarded, that makes her seem inauthentic. She's playing into his trap. And it also, by the way, makes it hard for her to distance herself from Joe Biden, which she desperately needed to do in a change election. She wasn't going to give him anything in that regard. So that's when I feel sorry for her, because I can see the situation and I go, you know what? I think that's a no-win situation for her there.
Yep. There's another sexism is absolutely a dynamic driving it. The fact that you also see it with Tim Waltz, being petrified of saying the wrong thing suggests to me that there's also a wider effect. And it sometimes feels almost like kind of asymmetrical warfare, that you still have two senior Democratic politicians terrified of making gaffes. And Trump is just up like rambling about Arnold Palmer's dick. He just doesn't care.
Absolutely.
And that's partly because he is special and has the main character energy, as people have described it. But it's also because the Democrats have to please a special group that the Republicans don't, which is legacy liberal media. You know, if Harris gaffes, if Waltz gaffes, the way that the New York Times and people like it prove their bona fides is by reporting that gaffe in detail and questioning and all that sort of stuff. While as, conservative podcasters just go, yeah, that's what Trump meant all along. They will just change their opinion to match his gaffe. So that is very difficult to combat, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's not helpful as well, not having, primaries are a liability in the sense that you say things to appeal to the base, which then play less well in a general election. But on the other hand, it gives you a chance to recover from things as well. And I can see the logic that in such a curtailed campaign, you don't want to do anything wrong because if you stuff something up, you don't have time to fix it. And so I understand the thinking that led them down that path, but I agree that it made for, from someone consuming that through the TV, a very uninspiring experience. You don't have anything to grab onto. I didn't get a sense of her vision for the country. And, Trump, for all his flaws, you know what his vision for the country is. And when people are, not happy with the way things are going and they feel like they're struggling, they're going to go for the person who has a vision, even if it's a dark vision, over the person who is kind of not really telling you what she wants to do. And again, I think, I don't want to criticize her too much in the sense that I think in the circumstances she was in, she did a good job. But, I also think there was not very much in the campaign to be positively excited about.
Totally agree. And that's where I was about to go. I was about to say, I have a sympathy for her in an interview type situation or a sort of a messing around kind of situation, not being able to act loose and then being punished for that, for not acting loose. But what I don't have sympathy for is the strategy her campaign put her on. I don't know if it was her idea or if it was some campaign manager. I got no idea. But whoever came up with it, I don't like the strategy of not providing any policy sort of at the beginning there were no policies at all. Then they put out the policies, but they kind of hid them. They didn't sell them very hard, apart from three, like the $50,000 small business tax cut and the price gouging and that. Sorry, Richard.
And that's not exactly light on the hill kind of stuff, is it? No, right? It's not. We're fighting fascism with our book of coupons. Is a very you just can't beat someone as big as Trump by going small, I don't think.
Yeah, I think they could have been guarded and cautious and had some policies that people could grab onto. Just think about the defining features of her interviews are her not saying things about policy. Yep. It's her being asked about immigration and responding that she's a prosecutor. How many times did you hear that? It's her being asked about her 2019 positions and saying my values haven't changed as an answer. There was so much uncertainty and vagueness about her policies. It was really frustrating and it did not need to be the case. And I'll give you an example of that policy timidity, which is right down my alley because I actually talked about this on the podcast before it even happened. It was that just after the McDonald's thing, when Trump was in McDonald's, and I was saying, what do I think Kamala Harris should have done? Because all she did was just hide in the corner and go, shit, he's got me. And what should she have done? I said at the time, what she should have done is gone straight to the first checkout chick she could find in the supermarket and get a camera in front next to her and announce what the minimum wage is going to be under her. And going to say, this guy, he masquerades as minimum wage worker. These people, they get paid $7 an hour. Under me, they're getting paid $15 an hour or $16 an hour, whatever. By the end of my term, I guarantee in the next 4 years, they're going to have a minimum wage of X. And leave it up to him to match you. That would have just changed, I think, that entire, not just that day, that entire period. That's a big policy that people can understand. It's easy to grasp onto. You can repeat it over and over again. It's worked for Bernie Sanders for a bloody decade. She could make it work for a month. Yeah, and it would have been so easy to do. And that's what I said at the time. That's what she should have done. Little did I know. And I also said at the time, by the way, she does support a minimum wage hike. There's just no number attached to it, which is insane. But that's why I said at the time, little did I know that as I was recording that podcast, on the day I was recording that podcast, someone was asking her, a reporter was asking her about her proposed minimum wage hike. And she responded. She said, at least $15 an hour, but we'll work with Congress, right? That's something that's got to go through Congress, she said. And look, that's fair enough. It does have to go through Congress. But she was willing to say $15 an hour. She was willing to give a number to that reporter. That's the last time she ever mentioned it. It's the first time she ever mentioned it. It was the last time she ever mentioned it. Why couldn't she go big on $15 an hour against Trump? That's what I'm talking about, policy timidity. Not coming out with the big policy, even though she had it. It was there. There was no reason she couldn't have had the confetti and the big banners. She could have gone for it, but they just didn't do that once in this campaign. Even the price gouging and the stuff like that was still delivered as a kind of apology. Like she never went big on simple, easy to understand policies, and that was a perfect example. And I think that was a great shame, even though I also don't think that cost her. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think like looking at the Harris campaign just in its own bubble, not in contrast to the Trump campaign, like they didn't give people a lot to vote for. And again, I understand it's a short time period, but that is also on Democrats that, you know, that was the case. It's not a good offer to voters to say, look, I haven't really had time to think through what my vision is for the country. You know, I've only got a couple of months to do this, so I'll figure it out later. Like, that's not a good offer. And you can understand why people were not thrilled by that. And you as much as I think, you know, we've all talked about the, you know, understandability of the circumstances, and the circumstances are not her fault, they're Joe Biden's fault. But like, it's still a problem to sort of suggest, you know, because also a lot of people spend many years before they run thinking about their vision for the country and, you know, what they're going to run on. And she did run before. So it's not like this is the first time she ever thought about running for president. And my feeling is that's just not really her style. She's not the like big vision person in the way that someone like Obama was. Like he didn't win on the back of, you know, all these like small specific policies. It was universal healthcare, you know, end the war in Iraq. It was these big ideas, and it was hope and change, you know, which is vague. And I guess, like, you know, we're not crediting Harris for her vague things either, but, you know, it was attached with him. It was attached to the sort of specific thinking he'd done about, you know, there is no Black America, there's no white America, you know, like he built up a kind of, brand is a horrible way to put it, but, you know, a philosophy around America and governing. You'd written a book about it. You know, you had the sense that he'd thought about it and that he had a vision for the country, and that was backed up by some concrete proposals, but also was a big picture thing. And Harris, I think, because of the time constraints of the campaign, was just offering these very piecemeal things, which I think people received, and they thought, well, that's not for me. Like, I'm not about to start a small business, so I've got a home. I've got an expensive mortgage. Like, what are you doing for me? Like, I feel like I heard that a lot, especially after the debate, a lot of the kind of interviews with people after the debate, people saying, well, you know, I don't have a kid in childcare. Like, what are you doing for me? What are you doing for me? And the problem when you have these micro-targeted policies is they're only going to hit with a small number of people. And, you know, even though it makes sense in one sense why she didn't have time to develop this big theory of the case and this big vision, like, that's not a good thing. Like, that's not a good thing to offer the American people for president. And, you know, like Biden, we just keep coming back to this, but like, he screwed them by putting them in that position.
Also, let's not forget, I mean, we often compare the Trump in an unfavorable way. In this case, we can compare the Trump in a favorable way. All he was doing, pretty much every 2 or 3 days, he was throwing out another brain fart. That was a big vision policy. Yeah. Even though they were small policies, but just no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime, no tax, like just like that kind of stuff. You know, like just there's one after another, after another, after another. It's not like it can't be done. And especially also, given she had it there. But also all of those things fit in a coherent picture. It's lower taxes, tariffs are going to pay for everything. Get all the immigrants out. Like, it was
even those like, no tax on tips, no tax on social security, those are all things that fit into a broader picture. You have a very clear sense of the overriding priorities of his campaign, what his overriding vision for the country was, and everything that he was pitching was basically in service of that. The things that weren't were quickly forgotten. That Trump's paying for everyone's IVF. Is that going to happen? I don't think it is. We just forgot about that, because just like we forget about everything Harris pitched because it doesn't fit into some broad, easy to understand for the casual observer campaign theme.
It's a clever observation. Richie.
Why did the Democrats become allergic to stunts? My to stunts, props, you would think that the social media era is absolutely made for this. My theory is that it's because Michael Dukakis got into a tank once, and they've been scarred by that forever since. But Trump is just stunts galore. He hopped in the garbage truck. He had the fist bump. Someone said, and this is telling, I can't credit them because I can't remember who they are. Someone said Harris did not produce a single iconic image during the whole campaign. There's no photo or image or event from the Harris campaign that has lodged in cultural memory, even for a moment.
The one that could have, she was very quick to dismiss, which was the one of her niece at the convention, which was a very beautiful image. But she was like, no, don't want to talk about that. Don't want to talk about race.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's true.
That's a good call.
The kind of tech bro mindset that fed the Obama, especially Obama 2008 campaign, was that they were mastering the new technologies of social media as a messaging medium. And I mean, that's just completely Republican territory now. I mean, that's culturally right-wing territory. The moment you're on Facebook, you're on enemy territory. And the one exception was Twitter, major exception was Twitter. And look what happened to that this election cycle.
Yeah. Okay, let me throw this one to you in particular, Richie, this one, because you're the one who has been pushing the incumbent. It's just an anti-incumbent election. Trump would probably argue something else. Trump would say this election was all about me. That's what he'd probably say. And he'd say, not just this election. He'd say, I have just been through 3 elections, which were entirely about me, where all the Democrats talked about was me. Their entire campaign was fighting against me. All their ads were about me. Every question they answered was about me. In the case of Kamala Harris, I think literally every question she answered, she turned to an attack on Donald Trump. And he'd say, I have been fighting for years and years and years. Not only do they only talk about me, they are obsessed with doing things to stop me and to promote me and to go on about me. I've been very upfront the whole time. Everyone knows what they're voting for. I have not been hiding anything. They've been voting for me, warts and all, for 3 elections now. They've had one after another, and this election more than any other. People have known exactly what they were getting into. All the Democrats could talk about was me, and then the people chose me in a big way. They might have chosen me even with a majority of the vote, not just winning the vote, but potentially a majority of the vote. And certainly, an overwhelming majority on the Electoral College and the Senate, a big majority and a majority in the House. What we just saw here, he might say, is my massive mandate. This has nothing to do with anti-incumbent move. This has to do with the entire America getting together and recognizing that we all want to make America great again. Let's go and do it. Why is he wrong about that, Richie?
Well, I don't think he's fully wrong about that. I mean, all elections are a mandate to a degree. it would be bizarre, especially, I mean, I enjoyed your Trump impersonation, first of all, but it would be bizarre.
Didn't quite put the voice on.
Nobody in Trump's position would ever say, you know what, I've won a convincing electoral win, but I don't have a mandate and it's not about me. And actually, it's part of a wider worldwide pro-incumbent trend. Like, you still have to win, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, more pertinent in some ways to that are the Republican primaries. And I was really pleased that Melina brought up DeSantis. I mean, DeSantis is a formidable political figure, right? I think people forget how close his gubernatorial election was. I saw him debate Andrew Gillum, and Andrew Gillum was no slouch. Like, he really, really took it to him. He was considered a major rising star in the Democratic Party, and DeSantis won convincingly. Not by a huge margin, and he's since turned Florida bright red. You know, he's a Republican cultural hero. Trump was down on his luck post January 6th. It looked like his career was over, and he came back and just absolutely smashed DeSantis immediately. You know, and DeSantis had very, very important parts of the Republican cultural and political and media infrastructure behind him. They desperately didn't want Trump back. The entire Murdoch media empire went bananas for DeSantis. It made no difference at all. Yeah. By the time he was over with, everyone just thought of Ron DeSantis as a man who wears high heels. That's the kind of, you know, non-Newtonian quality that Trump can bring to this politics. So look, you know, Trump is a really, really, you know, once in a lifetime formidable political figure. And you can't just go, wow, this is, you know, an anti-incumbent trend. That's you still have to vote for somebody. And he has turned the Republican Party into a personality cult around him, and that is not going to change.
Melina, you got any thoughts?
I think another thing that is happening, and it'll be interesting to see how it develops over the coming years, is he has, over a process of years, just beaten the Republican Party into full submission. And I think he's reached the point in the cycle where he's starting to succeed at doing that to Democrats as well. I have a real sense with the result of this election that Democrats are tired of fighting against Trump.
Yeah.
And I think you can see it as well in the muted reaction to his victory compared to 2016. Like, Democrats are not happy about it. They're very miserable about it. But people are not shocked and angered and out in the street the way that were before. It is kind of exhausting to be constantly being like, this isn't normal. It is normal now.
Yeah,
Everyone's
right.
used to it.
Yeah.
And everyone, I think, is just a little bit over maintaining the outrage. Not because they want to be, just because it's hard to be continually outraged about this person over and over again for 8 years, now 12 years. People are losing their endurance for it, I think. And whether they'll be re-inspired by his acts in office, you know, and we are going to see, you know, just for example, if he starts trying to deport people en masse, that's going to get messy, that's going to get ugly. I'm sure that stuff like that is going to start to re-energize opposition to him. But at the moment, and I think in terms of the lower turnout we saw with Democrats in the election, it is a reflection of people getting a little bit exhausted with resisting him from the left.
And let's give him credit. That is definitely one of his greatest attributes. He can outlast anyone. Like, I mean, some might say that is something that's not quite right in his head. Like, it's not necessarily healthy mentally, but it's a fact.
Yep.
Yeah, it's you know, I say that as someone who I'm pretty good at outlasting people
You are.
myself. But, I've got to take the hat off to him. He's pretty good at it.
There's a in the 1990s, there was a satirical magazine in New York called Spy, and Spy magazine it's a great magazine. It's worth looking up some stuff about it if you're not familiar with it. And they did a test where they took checks for small amounts of money and sent them to
yes.
public figures and celebrities and people. And the joke was that they would, and this was at a time where you had to go and cash checks in person. Like, they signed them as checks that had to be cashed in person. they did them for smaller and smaller amounts of money to see who would actually still be bothered to go to the bank in person. You know, they're a billionaire and they would be, who's willing to go to the bank for $7, you know, that sort of stuff. And they kept going lower and lower and lower amounts, and more people dropped out. And the last person, he outlasted all of them, was Donald Trump going to the bank in person for like 3 cents.
That's a great story. There is one other thing about the proof that there is a real anti-incumbent factor in this election. And that is from the exit polls again. Joe Biden had 40% approval in this exit poll. And for that 40% who approved of him, 96% voted for Harris. Out of everyone else, 82% vote for Republicans. And so that's another example of every point of approval that Joe Biden got is just added pretty much directly onto Harris's vote.
Yep.
And so, it's an enormous effect, the incumbency effect here. And if the incumbent is on the nose, then there's not much added onto her voting tally. It's as simple as that. Like, it's a kind of almost voting for Biden through her and the way it worked out. So I just think that's another reason why I just think, it's not much really she could have done. I have one more thing I want to add about in hindsight, and then I think this podcast has gone on for a while.
I thought we were still in the first half. It's PEP, isn't it?
We can keep on going if you want, mate. Remember I said about outlasting? Yes. I'm happy to keep on going. There is the section which we didn't get to was the future, about what's coming up next, what we can expect going forward. So I'm going to just put to you this area I've got now about the reevaluating the campaigns. And you can think about anything else you want to add about the future, and then we can wrap up. The poll thing, I'll do as an unleashed after you guys are gone. I'll take pity. But okay, so what I just want to talk about now, just quickly, while you guys are thinking about the future there, is the thing that kind of annoyed me. I don't think this made any difference to the actual result, but I think this didn't work at all. And yes, this is me doing the thing I just said before about just talking about my pet peeves. But I genuinely think this doesn't work. I think that it annoys people, not just me. It does annoy other people. And I don't know if there's evidence in the exit polls. I don't think there is. But I'm sure this doesn't help the Democrats' cause. And that is, I think the permanent hysteria strategy does not work. And they need to stop doing it. And what I'm talking about is, in particular, first of all, there was the 2 weeks they wasted of this campaign calling everyone fascist. That did not help. And I know that part of it was Millie doing it and the other dude, John Kelly, talking about it. I get that. That's fine. You can't control them, even though I suspect they did control them. But you can't control them. That's fine. But you as a campaign, they definitely decide to switch flick the switch to fascist. There's no doubt about that. For 2 weeks, they were going hard on that. And I just don't think that added anything at all. I think that completely undermined the vibe of the campaign. Until that point, it had been a positive campaign, a fun campaign, an energetic campaign, and then it became dark and moody. And I don't think that worked to anyone's benefit. In fact, that was exactly when Trump went positive. And I think it helped him. And I think the exit polls suggest that when you look at who won the last week and how in September, Harris was going fantastically. And I don't think it worked for them.
Can I say one thing quickly on the fascist point? And it also sort of loops back to what we're talking about in terms of double standards for Harris, but also double standards or different rules for Democrats and the way that they're treated in the national media. The result of bringing up this fascist question, Trump had called Harris a fascist a bunch of times already. No one cared. As soon as it was brought up in Democratic circles, it's not even, we basically spent 2 weeks debating the meaning of the word fascist.
Yeah.
It's not even like we were talking about Trump's behavior and whether it's disqualifying or dangerous or any of those things that are actually substantive around, the reasons why people are calling Trump a fascist. It just became a semantic debate. And, no one cares about that. Obviously, some people do, but most people don't. And that to me is where it was obvious that it was an absolute loser of an issue. Because even though, more broadly, you can talk about how much people did or didn't care about the threat to democracy argument. But as soon as it devolved into a debate about not Trump's behavior, but literally like, I've looked up fascist in the dictionary. Who cares? Truly.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think that like the takeaway, the bottom line takeaway is not people, as you say, divining some nuance on the exact meaning of fascist and applying to Donald Trump. The takeaway is, Democrats say that Donald Trump is bad. Oh, wow, that's a great shock. Like, it's just a waste of time. They didn't have much time. I don't think it cost them. I don't think it made things worse. It was just a waste of time. And so much time with Donald Trump is spent with these kinds of criticisms that I just don't think do anything. They just don't take any paint off him whatsoever. And I feel like we should know that by now, 8 years down the track. It makes you seem less serious. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. On election day, Michael Beschloss on MSNBC, who is a historian, a serious historian, was asked to describe the crossroads of the election, what we were expecting to happen as a historian. And could he get any less serious than this response?
Michael, you and John and other great historians often talk about hinge days in history, hinge moments in history, and we could go through them all over the last 250 years in this country. This does feel in many ways like a hinge day, which is to say we're going down one of two very different paths by perhaps tomorrow morning.
Yes, and that's what, if historians in the future are allowed to write books, and by the way, that question is open this morning, and if people are allowed to go on television and say what they think in the future, which again, that question is open this morning, in the future, historians are going to look back on this day and say, this is the day that America made a choice between freedom and democracy on one side and authoritarianism and dictatorship.
Okay, now I played to the end of the sentence because I didn't want to come off halfway through the sentence, but my point was the middle bit.
Yeah.
Like the bit about if historians are allowed to write books in the future and if you're allowed to go on TV and talk about things in the future, like your takeaway isn't, oh my God, Trump is going to potentially stop historians writing books. Your takeaway is Michael Beschloss is a goose. That's your takeaway. It makes you look, it drags you drag yourself down to the level of what you're trying to have a go at by being silly, in my view. And I think that I can't believe we haven't learned that lesson yet. They got to stop doing that. And by the way, as well, on the same line, the constant taking people out of context and turning hysteria up to 10. And I'll give you an example I'm talking about then as well. I don't think it helps anybody at all. I think it's exhausting and annoying. The example I'm going to give is from the last week of the campaign. And the whole campaign was filled with outrage about comment after comment after comment. Like the last week you had first the Puerto Rico joke, which was just the biggest event in the world for about 2 days there, right? Except for apparently Puerto Rican places in America. I'm referring to the what came straight after, which was the comment about Liz Cheney.
And I don't blame him for sticking with his daughter. But his daughter's a very dumb individual, very dumb. She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person, and I'd have meetings with a lot of people, and she always wanted to go to war with people.
It was really...
I'm sorry, but that's just the MVP right there, isn't it? That's someone who just cleans everybody out. It's not easy to combat that. And yeah, it is taking her out of context because he's not talking about a firing squad. He's talking about her being on the front lines.
It's really obvious he's talking about her being on the front lines. Like really, really obvious. And my Twitter feed was filled with people foaming at the mouth going, why don't you talk about this? Like, about this? It was just, people were so worked up about this as if he was suggesting that he wanted to assassinate her. Drudge ran a front page that Trump called for her execution. That was his front page.
Yep.
And Cheney herself tweeted out, this is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death. He wasn't threatened. I was really disappointed with Liz Cheney because she's usually pre-restrained.
Yep.
This kind of stuff. That was just ridiculous from her. Even Jamie Raskin said it was bullshit.
Yes. I agree with you on the lying. I mean, that is ridiculous and absurd and counterproductive.
I'm just saying, don't lie to me.
I agree with that. I mean, that's just a distortion.
The bottom line is, Melina's already given the punchline to this, spoiler, which is the people who made up their mind in the last week made up their mind overwhelmingly for Trump. That's the result of this. That it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And it just makes me so frustrated because the Democrats never seem to stop doing this. In fact, they're doing it more. They're doing it more and more over time. So you look like you're going to jump in there.
See I'm eager to jump in here.
Go for it. Go for it. Jump in.
I agree with you that it's bullshit and that bullshit is bad. Sorry to the people who don't like swearing. I don't think it's correct to assume that it doesn't work for anybody. Look at the Trump campaign. Like, that was full of taking Kamala Harris out of context and Tim Walz out of context. If you are absorbing Trump campaign information and advertising, what you're learning is that Kamala Harris wants to give sex changes to people in prison, wants to let murderers go, wants to let the immigrants swamp the border, that Tim Walz wants boys to have tampons. What was the other big Kamala Harris one that was totally out of context? Oh, I'm blanking now. But pretty much like every ad that they ran and attack line that they ran against Harris and Walz was based on taking something out of context and blowing it up. And that's pretty standard fare for politics. It either works or it doesn't work. I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't say that the Democrats are the aberration in terms of using it as a strategy. And I also, to be honest, do think it works because anytime you talk to people who don't follow politics super closely, like, things like this do cut through. I mean, I don't want to get into specific examples, but you just you hear people repeat these things back to you. And like you're saying yourself, people are in your Twitter feed saying like, look, Trump said this thing about wanting to put Liz Cheney in front of a firing squad. I mean, isn't that the evidence that people do receive that as fact? Well, it's bad that people are receiving things that are taken out of context and thinking it's factual, but I don't know that it's necessarily ineffective.
Fair enough. Number one, I love you, as always, shooting me down. You're very good at it. But number two, I'm not saying, no point in time do I say that Democrats are the only ones who take people out of context. They definitely are not. Trump used to do this. The Trump people used to do this more than the Democrats. And the Democrats have caught up in the last few years. But I do think that there is a middle ground that you're trying to reach. You're trying to reach independent voters and all the rest. I do think that you make yourself less, a lot harder to take seriously if you're just making up shit and obviously making up shit. And I agree, the threat is real. And once again, I can point to an actual example here, which is that we saw earlier in this campaign what I think was an absolute crystal clear distillation of an authoritarian nightmare, which was Trump openly saying he was happy to use the army on protesters. That's not me taking him out of context. No. That's exactly what he said. And if I was running that campaign, that's the one that would be my transgender grab. That would be my over and over and over and over and over grab, because that is him admitting that he wants to actually act like a dictator. Not dictator for a day, which was a joke, but that actually is the kind of conduct that is worth condemning and warning about. And that's what I'm saying. You go big when you've got the goods. And they had the goods, and actually wasn't even the bit they cared about. The bit they cared about was Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi, which I thought was bullshit anyway. When he openly said exactly the nugget that you want to pick up and go, that there is the authoritarian bit right there. And so I think there is a way you can do it. I'm not suggesting you throw up your hands and you just stop fighting. I'm just saying that this Cheney shit doesn't help. It doesn't help at all, as far as I can see. Like, I don't see what it achieves, other than getting your own people to be foaming at the mouth. And I don't think that helps you at all. In fact, sorry, do you want to jump in here before I go on?
Look, we're kind of, it takes on a little bit of a fantasy football quality.
Yeah.
Where we can go, if we just lined up the individual grabs in the right way. This is very Chaz mindset, by the way.
It is.
With the right grabs, we can defeat fascism, as long as they're not taken out of context. I would suggest to you
that's going in
that you could. I mean, you've seen every grab in the world, so you know the best ones, right? You could put together the all-time Chaz reel of Trumpian authoritarianism not taken out of context.
Yeah.
And all of those together would not be nearly as good as the personal testimony of Trump's own vice president saying that he is a danger in this way. Saying it in a subtle way, but in a very distinct, very clear way to voters who still respect him, and they didn't listen.
Yeah. No, I acknowledge that. Yeah. I mean, I think we all understand each other here.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, Democrats were just throwing everything at the wall that they could to see if anything would stick, and nothing did. But yeah, I agree with you morally that everything you've said is the right thing to do. But just in terms of what cuts through, I just don't see the evidence that, things being more truthful, ergo cut through better. I mean, one of the ideas that has most stuck around, I think, from Trump's first term was Trump said you should inject bleach, and that's not what he said, but that's how everyone characterizes it, and I still hear people referencing it all the time. So I just think, there isn't a strong correlation between things that are truthful and things that are sticky.
Yeah. I don't think there's I agree. I don't think there's an inherent stickiness from the truth. Okay, let me tell you where this is all going. This is all going for a graph which I can't believe I haven't put up on PEP before, because this is I think I've shown you this graph before, Richie, which is a motivating graph for me. If you want to get a little peek inside my brain, this graph is going inside my brain at all times. Okay, it's from my favorite political scientist, Lee Drutman. And yes, I am the kind of person who has favorite political scientists. And he calls it the two-party toxic politics doom loop. And I want to show it to you right there. And I'm going to read out, for those who aren't watching it, what is on the two-party toxic politics doom loop. It is a circle. And the circle can consist of the following elements. Starts off with parties diverge further apart. The next step, stakes of politics feel higher and more emotional. The next step, the other party is an extreme threat and can't be trusted. And then both sides embrace their own facts and they cut off contact with the other side. And then that leads to insular us versus them thinking vindicates more radical political action. And then that leads to parties diverge further apart. And then we're on the circle again. I think that is one of the most serious problems facing not just America, but the world today. But particularly America. And that is why I get so obsessed about pedantic interpretations of people's statements, and why I despair so much when people respond to my pedanticism with more, as they call it, insular us versus them thinking, as Lee Drutman would put it. I don't even know how to put this in a question. Respond, Richie.
It's easy to mistake a polarized society for a sectarian society. Sometimes it can be more useful to think about US politics as sectarian rather than partisan. In fact, what seem to be do or die political differences like gay marriage can disappear almost immediately. But cultural sectarianism is deepening. There are some strange carve-outs to that. I guess when you were saying, I'll mention briefly, seeing I'm kind of here, I'm sure we'll go into the future of America more in PEPs to come, and we can't do it in the last 5 minutes. But what I will say is that a lot of people still, and a lot of PEPers, I think, still think about the US as a sort of temporarily embarrassed European social democracy. And that's how coastal liberals feel about the US. And they have a sort of slightly Aaron Sorkinized model that if only you can make the right speeches, if only you can stir people in the right way, it can sort of become like that. A phrase which someone said to me, which has really been helpful in my thinking about the US, is the US is not big Sweden, it's rich Brazil. And that really casts it in a very different light. And the sort of strange mosaics of behavior that looks so alien to us in places like Brazil, these kind of micro gradations of racism, as a Groiper so charmingly put it on the new Gab style Twitter, we don't care what race you are as long as you're racist. That is part of what politics looks like in places like Latin America. And I think the future of US politics looks much more like that now.
Yeah, I think as well, like I agree. And I think that, we look at America as a singular, unique place, and what's happening at the moment in America is arguably unusual, not in the whole course of America's history, but in recent times. But it's less unusual when you look at America in the context of the world. And there are lots of governments around the world that are democracies, but, have kind of authoritarian leaders that sort of push the bounds of democracy increasingly further and further. And, you look at different countries, this is to varying degrees. I mean, America at least has the benefit of Trump being term limited, which is not the case in, a lot of these, like Turkey and Hungary and Russia and places like this. Well, Russia used to be, but not anymore. So, I think that it's, one thing to remember is that, it's not such an aberration in the context of the world. I mean, a lot of bad things happen in the world, so that's not inherently comforting, but just still worth remembering. And the other thing when we talk about polarization, it is increasing and it is bad, but I think something that, particularly not on this podcast, but people in other parts of the media, just readily forget over and over again is how many people really don't care about politics. People who live and breathe politics every day, it's understandably easy to forget that most people are not following these things nearly as closely, if at all. And yes, there are obviously people who are very political in the States and who have very strong opinions, and the hostility between those groups is increasing, and that is a bad thing. But more people did not vote than voted for Harris or Trump. There are lots of people who just are not interested at all. And so it's just, you can overemphasize how much of America is caught up in this mindset. And the reality is, there are just lots of people going about their day who are not, at war with each other. And that's ultimately a good thing. And hopefully in time, a remoderating force against some of these people. There's reason for hope that, some of these intense feelings will kind of just reabsorb themselves into the populace and disperse in healthy ways. Because the reality is most people in America do not think this way. Even the people who do vote, they're not all hyper intense partisans who hate each other. So it is still ultimately a minority, and hopefully one that is peaking and will recede.
That's a nice note. I think we can go out on that one. Do you want to say anything else, Rich?
Yeah, I'm weirdly optimistic, mainly possibly because of lack of sleep. But yeah, it's a kind of cynical optimism, I guess. I think bizarrely, Trumpism may even wind up being a way for America to make peace with itself, being a white minority nation. But that is something I'm still figuring out.
Next, Pep.
Can I say one more thing on the sort of a future projection? Because we didn't really get into it in detail, but, about what a Trump presidency will look like. And, obviously he does have this big, He's won a majority. He's going to have the Senate and the House almost certainly, and the Supreme Court. As you noted earlier, Richie, he's going to have a lot of power. He does have, mandates, mandate for what? Not for everything. Mandate's a tricky concept, but, he does have a reasonable argument. He has a mandate to do what he wants to do. And in terms of that question of what is he going to do in his presidency, I certainly think he's going to try to do all the things that he's told us he's going to do. He's not going to be successful in doing all those things. Like all presidents are unsuccessful at most of the things they say they're going to do. But I think the other thing to bear in mind when we start kind of thinking about, what's going to happen in the next 4 years is presidencies. One of the main things presidents do is respond to crises that are unforeseen. And Trump's presidency was ultimately, the trajectory of it was just, enormously altered by the COVID crisis. None of us saw that coming in 2016. Similarly with Bush and 9/11, that was not on the cards in 2000 when he was elected. And so these are horrible things, and hopefully nothing horrible on that scale happens. But it's just to say that, all the things that we can predict that may or may not happen, there are just things that we don't know what's going to happen. And that's probably going to have a huge impact on what his second term ends up looking like. And so to a large extent, the future is unknown, for better or worse. That's probably a less optimistic note to end on, but
it's not bad. It's not bad. It's certainly more optimistic than me talking about a doom loop. so I'll take that. Thank you very much, Melina.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richie.
Thank you, Chaz. Thank you, Melina.
Thank you, Richie.
I'll see you guys after the White Flash with a poll audit, our biannual poll audit. Oh, it's exciting. You wait. Lots of polls. Till then, stay peppy. Welcome to the other side of the White Flash. This is a slimline Chaz Unleashed. And today we are just talking polls. We are undertaking our biannual polling audit where we see which of the pollsters or polling aggregators in this case were the most accurate or if they just all failed. Let's start off with the projections. The 538 projection was Harris 50%, Trump 49%. Nate Silver's Silver Bulletin had Harris 50.015%, Trump 49.65%. They were projections, chance of winning. So they're saying 50-50 chance of winning. That's not really useful. You can't really break down the 50-50 chance. By definition, in a two-party race, it's going to be a 50-50 chance. if you want to cover your ass, I guess. So let's just ignore that. Let's get into the actual poll off. Now, Real Clear Politics, let's throw them into the mix. They're an aggregator that just robotically averages out all the polls. They don't put any weighting on them whatsoever. Just add them up and then divide them, average them out. And so they're one kind of polling aggregator. And then you got 538, which is a different kind of polling aggregator. They give polls weightings for reliability. And Nate Silver also gives polls weighting for reliability in his Silver Bulletin. He plays his numbers a little bit more as well. So basically for Nate Silver and for the 538, they will give unreliable polls very little weight and very little significance in their average, but the more reliable polls, they have a bit more heft, and then they average out the results of that. Also, we're going to take consideration Atlas Intel because they're supposedly the most accurate pollster of 2020. As an individual pollster, let's throw them into the mix, see how they go. Normally, the individual pollsters don't go as well as the aggregators. And especially I'm interested with Atlas Intel because they seem to be suspiciously Republican-leaning throughout the campaign. At least people said they were. How did they go? Well, on the national vote, the popular vote, 538 had Harris at plus 1.2%. Silver had Harris at plus 1%. Real Clear Politics had Harris by 0.1%. And Atlas Intel had Trump at plus 1%. In reality, Trump was plus 3%, at least so far. So everyone was miles off. But I do want to emphasize so far because that popular vote is going to change over the next few days. There's going to be more popular vote and the percentages will definitely change. I suspect, because we're heading to the West Coast now, and the West Coast obviously are more pro-Democrat. So whether that ends up being Trump plus 2%, maybe Trump plus 1%, I think it's going to get a lot closer to Atlas Intel's number, to be honest. But we'll revisit that in the next PEP. Even though they seem miles off at the moment, I don't think they're going to end up miles off. But let's go to the states then. The states, we've got damn near final results for a lot of these, so we can draw some conclusions. The key states, Pennsylvania, 538 said Harris plus 0.2%. Silver said Trump plus 0.1%. Real Clear Politics said Trump plus 0.4%. Atlas Intel said Trump plus 1%. Reality was Trump plus 2%. So Atlas Intel was the best there, pretty close to spot on, really. And the others are a little bit further out. Michigan, 538 said Harris plus 1%. Nate Silver said Harris plus 1.2%. Real Clear Politics said Harris plus 0.5%. Atlas Intel said Trump plus 2%. Reality, Trump plus 1.5%. Once again, Atlas Intel has got it pretty much on the button there. The others, not quite so close, but they're not terrible. The worst there was Nate Silver at 1.2% Harris. He was 2.7% off. But within that 3% margin, we always say polls, when you look at polls, you should consider a 3% margin on either side, generally speaking. So everyone was in the 3% margin there, as they were, by the way, for Pennsylvania. Nevada, 538 said Trump plus 0.3%. Nate Silver said Trump plus 0.6%. Real Clear Politics said Trump plus 0.6%. Atlas Intel said Trump plus 3%. The reality so far, although the numbers are still coming in, is Trump plus 3.4%. Once again, Atlas Intel's got it on the nose. The others a little bit further off. The most out is 538, which is 3.1% out. That reality is coming in further. Nevada still has about 20% of the vote to come in. So I suspect all of them are going to be within the 3% margin at the end of that process. But Atlas Intel looking real good. Wisconsin, 538 had Harris plus 0.1%. Nate Silver had Harris plus 1%. Real Clear Politics had Harris plus 0.4%. Atlas Intel had Trump plus 1%. Reality, Trump plus 0.9%. Atlas Intel is within 0.1%. That's just perfect. And the worst there is 538 and Nate Silver, who are both 1.9% out, well within the 3% margin of error. So far, the pollsters are doing pretty well. How about Georgia? 538, Trump plus 0.8%. Nate Silver, Trump plus 1%. Real Clear Politics, Trump plus 1.3%. Atlas Intel, Trump plus 2%. The reality, Trump plus 2.2%. Again, Atlas Intel perfect. And the worst there was 538, which was 1.4% out. Well within the 3% margin of error. Once again, great. North Carolina, 538, Trump plus 0.9%. Nate Silver, Trump plus 1.1%. Real Clear Politics, Trump plus 1.2%. Atlas Intel, Trump plus 2%. Reality, Trump plus 3.4%. There, once again, Atlas Intel's the best. The worst was 538. Again, 538 is consistently the worst. In this case, 538 was 2.5% behind. Once again, within the 3% margin of error. Finally, Arizona, 538, Trump plus 2.1%. Nate Silver, Trump plus 2.4%. Real Clear Politics, Trump plus 2.8%. Atlas Intel, Trump plus 5%. Reality, Trump plus 5.9%. Atlas Intel perfect again. And the others kind of off are the worst. Again, 538, which is 3.8% off. That isn't so good, but Arizona's only about 70% counted. So that is going to change as well. Once again, it will come in. My suspicion is they will end up within 3%, but Atlas Intel will continue to be perfect. Okay, so in the end, Atlas Intel was pretty close to dead on for almost every state there, except for North Carolina, with our 1% off there. and give Arizona and Nevada a little chance to reel in further. Second, for all the carrying on about red wave polling from Simon Rosenberg, who's the Democratic pollster, who's obsessed with these faux Republican polls that he says pollute the sample and are just there to put their thumb on the scale. Well, it's Real Clear Politics that counts all of them exactly the same as any other poll. Real Clear Politics didn't minimize any of the dodgy Republican pollsters like 538 and Nate Silver did. And Real Clear Politics was more accurate. It was better. So take that, Simon Rosenberg. The worst was 538. It takes all that stuff most into consideration. So, I'd say that at least in this election, the sham Republican pollsters were spot on, like our mate Ryan Fournier at the beginning of the podcast, who was the most shammy of the sham Republican pollsters. So there we go. I don't know if there's any other conclusions we can draw, but 538 was pulling up the rear there. Atlas Intel as a single pollster was almost perfect, but importantly, the polls kind of did their job this time around. I think we'll confirm with the popular vote in another week just to make sure of that. But I'm getting the feeling that everyone was mostly within 3% for most of the measures, which is all you can ask for from a pollster. So this was a good year for pollsters. Not that anyone's saying that, but I think it's actually true. Anything else about... we should mention the Senate before we draw any conclusions. I've only got the 538 numbers for them, unfortunately. And let's be honest, these numbers were pretty poor, actually. I probably should have said this before I drew conclusions. Ohio, 538 had Republican +1. The reality was Republican +4. Wisconsin had Democrat +2. The reality was Democrat +1. That's pretty good. Nebraska was Republican +2. The reality was Republican +8. That's not so good. Pennsylvania was Democrat +3. The reality was a tie. Yeah, that's okay. Within 3 points. Michigan was Democrat +4. The reality was a tie. Not so good. Texas was Republican +4. The reality was Republican +9. Not so good. Nevada was Democrat +6. The reality was Democrat +1. So apart from Wisconsin, which was pretty good, the others were all 3 points off or more. Some were significantly more than 3 points, so they weren't so good. A honourable or dishonourable mention to the Selzer poll, which is considered to be the best poll in America, the gold standard poll, as they say, in Iowa. The Selzer Iowa poll had Democrats +3 in Iowa. The reality, Republican +13. Ouch! Now that's a real polling miss there. 16 points off. That's pretty bad. I actually feel sorry for Ann Selzer here because she must have known when she got that result that she was probably in serious trouble. No one was expecting the Democrats to win Iowa. But, she didn't diddle her figures. She didn't play with them and manipulate them to make them seem more conventionally acceptable. She just published the data and took her lumps. Good on her. She didn't deserve the kind of reaction she got from people, certainly not the sledge she got from the Trump campaign. They put out a statement from their regional communications unit that said, for those covering the election in Iowa, starting on day one, President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance will help to ease costs, secure the border, and protect Social Security for retirees like Ann Selzer. Aww. Oh, poor Ann. She didn't do herding. Remember we were talking last week about this problem of herding where when people get outliers from polls, they don't publish them. They just twiddle the numbers a little bit or just disappear the poll. So they're just kind of the same as everyone else. Ann Selzer didn't do that. She published her results. Nate Silver, he noted the week before the election that his database had 249 polls that were at least partly conducted in October in battleground states. And 193 of those 249 polls showed Harris and Trump within 2.5 points. He said there was a 1 in 9.5 trillion chance that so many polls would be so close. He highlighted Wisconsin as having 33 of 36 polls within 2.5 points, saying that, when I say within 2.5 points, I mean where the two candidates were within 2.5 points of each other. And he said there was just a 1 in 2.8 million chance that so many polls would show Wisconsin so close. So he's sure there was herding. And when you look at those aggregator stats I read out before, how Real Clear Politics and Nate Silver and 538 are all kind of around the same. It did suggest there might have been a bit of herding going on. Alan Lichtman, we got to mention him when we're talking about polling audits. Let's audit his projection. His projection, of course, was that Kamala Harris was going to be president, and he was very smug about it. He wasn't like me, nervously flitting around at the last second. No, he was extremely confident, and he was calling people out, him and Nate Silver at each other's throats during this election campaign. It turned out that Lichtman was wrong. I say he was wrong in 2016 as well, although he doesn't admit it, but he's definitely wrong this year. And although, according to Nate Silver, Lichtman misapplied his own criteria. And so his model would have been correct if Lichtman wasn't so partisan. That's what Nate Silver has to say. Lichtman was not impressed with that point of view. Lichtman said, unlike Nate Silver, who'll try to squirm out of why he didn't see the election coming, I admit that I was wrong. I'll assess the election and the keys on my live show this Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Sounds less like an admission and more a promo for his live stream. So I don't know about that one. And finally, we should give credit to Gallup, who about a month ago, do you remember, we went through their fundamentals, where they have these fundamental polls that they undertake every election. We're talking about polls like, for instance, party identification and leaning, the party is best able to handle the most important problem, satisfaction in the direction of America, economic confidence, the party is better able to keep America prosperous, presidential job approval, and party favourable ratings. All those stats, they say, have either a moderate or a strong correlation with presidential outcomes. In particular, the party identification and leaning. If you recall, the Republicans were winning at 48% to 45% Democratic, and that's the first time the Republicans have been ahead for a real long time. And it's also, I believe, just about a perfect predictor. The party best able to handle the most important problem. Republicans, 46%, Democrats, 41%. Once again, that one pretty much never lies. And satisfaction in America's direction was 22%. Economic confidence was minus 28%. The party better able to keep America prosperous was Republicans 50%, Democrats 44%. Presidential job approval was 39% a month ago when they took that. And the party favourable ratings was Republicans 43, Democrats 42. All their polls, all their fundamental polls favoured Republicans, suggesting the Republicans were going to win the election, and they were right. Sorry, Alan Lichtman. Gallup gets the chockies this time round. And one more of these sort of projecting kind of indicators. The more popular candidate measure. So you look at who's got the highest favourables on the day of the election. That went bust. As I told you before, Kamala Harris had 1 point higher favourables than Donald Trump, at least according to the exit poll. That might change because that's quite a fine margin there. If indeed Donald Trump had a lower favourable rating than Kamala Harris, it would turn out that since 1956, the candidate with the highest favourables on the day won every election except for two. So won 15 out of 17 elections. And can you guess the two where the candidate who was less popular ended up winning the election? You probably guessed it. It was Donald Trump in 2016 and Donald Trump in 2024. So that is, of course, assuming that Donald Trump continues to have lower favourables when the exit polls continue to be adjusted. All right, so Atlas Intel and Gallup, well done. 538, did okay. The polling industry did okay. Real Clear Politics did okay. Nate Silver did okay. Alan Lickman, bad Lickman. Bad. That will do, folks. Thank you very much for sticking with us till the end. I'll be back with you next week. Until then, stay peppy.